Military life? It's definitely not for everyone. Imagine you met the man of your dreams. You're a successful nurse and your husband is a decorated sergeant in the Air Force. You have 2 beautiful children together, but before your 30th birthday, someone with their own selfish desires and plans not only ruins your life but takes it from you. The story takes place in San Antonio, Texas. It's in the deep south of Texas, only about 150 miles from the Mexican border. It's a historical town. This is where the Battle of the Alamo took place back in 1836 when the Mexican troops invaded Texas. San Antonio is one of the biggest tourist spots for anyone who wants to visit Texas. It's a beautiful city with a lot to do and a lot to see. One popular destination is the Riverwalk area, where you can enjoy shopping, margaritas, and little Tex-Mex cuisine. Or you can ride a river taxi, which looks super fun. There's live music in the streets and lots of restaurants to enjoy. I want to actually visit. I haven't had a chance yet, but it's definitely on my list. Aside from being a top tourist destination, San Antonio is also a place that a lot of military families call home. It's actually known as Military City, USA. It has been home to a consistent military presence for close to 300 years and has one of the nation's largest active and retired military populations. The largest military base in San Antonio is the Lackland Air Force Base. Now, I knew going into this case that I didn't know much about the military. I thought I knew enough, but I learned a lot, and I hope that I can impart some of my new knowledge on you. If you're like me and you don't have a military background, my grandfather was in military intelligence for the United States, but he died when I was young, so I did not have the experience of military life. It is a whole different world for those who live in it. Many of you can and most likely relate. It's a very close-knit community, especially if you're on the bases. One of the families living in San Antonio in the 80s was the Lipscombs, Kathleen and William Lipscomb, and their 2 young children. William, who went by Bill, was a high-ranking master sergeant in the Air Force at the time, and his beautiful wife Kathleen was a nurse. I want to introduce you to both of them, and I'll start with Kathleen. Ella Kathleen Adams was born on September 1st, 1956 in Louisiana to her mother, Nadine Adams, and her father, Charles Leonard Adams. Ella went by her middle name Kathleen, and it was finally shortened affectionately to Cathy, so I'm going to call her Cathy in this video. Cathy had one sister, Darlene, and she and Darlene were very close. The sisters were also very close to their mother. Cathy grew into a stunning woman. She was a petite little platinum blonde with crystal blue eyes, and she wasn't just gifted in the looks department. Cathy was very intelligent. She valued academics and studied to become a nurse. That was her dream. She hadn't even gotten far on her journey into her medical career when she met William Lipscomb. Now, because this isn't one of my deep dives, I'm not going to go into detail about their childhoods, but what I do want to do is focus as much as I can on what I gathered about what life was like for Cathy and William before tragedy struck. William, who I said went by Bill, was around 4 years older than Cathy. He was handsome, hardworking, and a military man. Some women are even more attracted to men when they're in uniform, and they were the perfect couple. They fell in love and married when they were young. Cathy was about 20, and Bill was around 24. It's pretty common for individuals in the military to get married young. Sometimes it's for the benefits, and other times it's for the companionship of someone they can come home to. Being in the military is not an easy job. It can be lonely being away for so long. Marriage allows these men to feel like they're coming home to someone. It also has its financial benefits, like housing and increased compensation. We won't know the full extent of the reasons why they got married when they did, but there's also the fact that being in love means you will do anything to be close to your partner. It made sense to both of them, and before they knew it, it was 1986, and they were living in San Antonio with 2 beautiful children. They had a home just a few miles from the Air Force Base. Everyone that knew the couple knew that they were a perfect match. One of the reasons is that they were both hardworking and attractive. They looked like Barbie and Ken. You know, they just had that gorgeous look to them. They just matched. He was like the tall, dark, handsome type, and she was the bubbly blonde. Cathy worked as a nurse at the University of Texas Health Science Center, and she was very skilled in her field. She was rising up in her career. Cathy was ambitious. Her plan wasn't to be stagnant and content. She wanted to continue her education and excel at many different specialties, very similar to the way Bill approached his work. This tends to bring couples together, similar outlooks on life and career. Bill's career was taking off at a very high speed. This is what I had to learn about when it came to the military, because everything I read about Bill was extraordinary. The ranks and titles meant nothing to me since I didn't understand how it all worked. But once I did, I was like, okay, wow. This man, he's like legit. He's a superstar. You've probably heard the phrase, enlisted in the military. It's the most common way that someone enters. They talk to a recruiter, go through their basic training, and work hard to move up through different ranks as they do. Not only are they decorated with different medals and badges on their uniforms, but the uniforms also change as you move up this ladder. And not only that, the higher someone moves up in the ranks, the more responsibility, power, and authority they have. In order for us to truly know Bill, it's important we understand how this works, how he ranked up, how someone gets there, and what it entails. I found it pretty fascinating, so let me show you the ranks in the Air Force for reference, and I will also explain for those that are just listening. Here are the enlisted ranks. On the top, they start with E1, which is a basic airman, and they go to E9, which is the Chief Master Sergeant. That sounds so important, and it really is. Just to understand how hard it is to get there, one statistical example shows it takes approximately 17 years to get to where Bill was, and he was only 33. This man was being promoted left and right. To help me understand the complexity, I found a YouTube channel called 21 Shades of J. It's right here. I'm going to put it up on the screen. He creates videos explaining how to rank up in the Air Force. He got to E6 in 6 years, and it's literally referred to as E6 and 6 because it's quite an accomplishment. It takes a lot of studying, and I had no idea. But there's something called the Weighted Airman Promotion System, abbreviated as WAPS, not to be confused with anything else. It consists of tests that an airman has to take so they can rise up the ranks, and they're intense. I found a study guide, and it was 200 pages long. Wow, I read somewhere that Bill wasn't even 30 years old, and he was already a Master Sergeant, which is an E7 rank. He wouldn't just pass these exams, he would ace them. Something else about Bill stood out: his actual position in the Air Force. He was a military training instructor, and man did I watch some interesting videos on this. This is a very important position, and I just want to point out that now we have a lot of resources. This was back in the 80s. They didn't have the resources like a YouTube video by someone who's already gone through everything and can give you advice on how to study. Everything had to be done the old school way. Instructors like this are actually looked at as having one of the most important jobs in the Air Force. They are the drill instructors. They are the very first impression that an entry-level airman gets about what it means to be an American soldier. There's a lot of pride in a position like this. There's no place for mediocrity for Bill. Those below him both feared him and admired him. It was Bill's job to take these kids coming into the Air Force and mold them into who they would be known for the rest of their lives. These individuals will never forget their training instructor. So Bill took his job very seriously, maybe even more seriously than anything else in his life. It's what he lived for and where he found his identity. I'm telling you all this because as the head of the household, and a military one at that, his status and reputation mattered. Therefore, the Lipscomb's lifestyle revolved around the importance of Bill, exhibiting a stellar reputation, professionalism, integrity, honor, and excellence. The military life isn't for everyone, but luckily Cathy knew how to support Bill the way that he needed. Through an entirely different profession, being a nurse, she also had to exhibit her own sense of responsibility, respect, and professionalism. They made a perfect pair. The couple was looked at as a model for not only those around them who knew them intimately and admired them, but also for all of the airmen that came through Bill's training. The Lipscombs had it all. They both loved their careers and their kids. Cathy was a doting and supportive wife, raising their 2 children while working hard during the day and caring for the children after school. On the weekends, she would attend all of the military events, all the balls, the gatherings. She even loved to cheer him on at the games he played. He was in the military softball league. But things at home were a little different. Cathy was used to being in Bill's shadow. She was okay with it, especially when they were in public. But when it came time for Bill to display interest in her work, it seemed like he almost resented her. Cathy's hospital had gotten a research grant at one point, and she was excited about the possibility of applying for a research position. But Bill wasn't thrilled. He didn't think she needed to add any more to her plate. It was like he was okay with where her career was, as though he was the one responsible for making that decision for her. It does take a certain type of person to be a drill sergeant. They can be rigid and controlling. That may be okay on base, but it's not great for a relationship. I don't know if you can relate to this, if you've ever been with someone like this, but Cathy just felt that Bill did not take her job seriously. She felt belittled. He was used to talking to his airmen in a rough tone, and he would forget that Cathy was his wife. He would say things like, "Well, you just sit around and change bedpans all day or wipe people's butts, so what's important about that?" This was tough because Cathy had a lot of ambition, and she was sick of living in Bill's shadow. She loved and respected him, of course, but she began to become distant. If you take that again and again, you're going to retreat. There's only so much someone can take. This caused them both to be distant and to throw themselves into their work even more than their relationship at home. This was actually a positive thing for Cathy. She wanted to do research in the OBGYN department, so she applied for the position, which required testing, report writing, and putting in samples of her work. To her delight and surprise, Cathy got the position, and it was a big deal for her. This was building her confidence. It gave her a sense of purpose and pride. When she got home and let Bill know that she and a few colleagues were going to go out and celebrate, instead of being happy and congratulating her, he seemed to resent the entire situation. But that didn't stop Cathy. She began her new role and excelled quickly. It was like, why can he do it and not her? I think that's how I would feel. I've definitely been there. But we have to remember that we don't know what couples agreed to when getting into the relationship. We don't know those unspoken things that are not public. We don't know if he asked her, "Will you be my supportive wife? Stay home with the kids. I will give all the military benefits and support you." We don't know. Nevertheless, this doesn't stop Cathy. She is excited and begins her new role, rising up quickly. Her diligence doesn't go unnoticed. Cathy is asked to join a new research team led by one of the most prestigious doctors in the OBGYN department, Dr. David Pearl. This is a huge accomplishment for Cathy. Dr. Pearl chooses the best of the best for his team, and he is delighted to have Cathy on board. Now she can use all of the skills that she has learned to master and showcase her expertise. Unlike Bill, Dr. Pearl understands the complexities involved in her specialty. He is there to provide encouragement and praise. Cathy feels the best when she's at the hospital. It's where she feels that she belongs. Home starts to be a place that she would rather not be, and Cathy's identity is moving away from being a wife and a mother to an OBGYN nurse and beyond. She intends on continuing her education, and Dr. Pearl approves. Now Cathy is choosing to spend even longer hours at work, away from Bill but closer to Dr. Pearl, who is thankful for her hard work and dedication. Cathy feels appreciated and seen when she is in his presence. It boosts her self-esteem. Now she comes home smiling, happy, and on top of the world, and Bill can see that. Considering he knows he isn't the one putting a smile on her face, he starts to wonder what or who is. At this point, as they say, they were 2 ships just passing in the night. With their daily routines being so different, they weren't spending any quality time together. Instead, Cathy starts to talk to Dr. Pearl. It started with little things, as it always does, like when he would compliment her. She would be so grateful and let the words escape her lips. Those words my husband doesn't say. So that's how this started. The way he treated her was the opposite of the way that Dr. Pearl did. Cathy was stunning on the outside, but she was also very sweet, likable, caring and generous. The list goes on. Soon enough, she and Dr. Pearl were connecting on more than just a professional level. They were starting to connect on a more personal one. She was now calling him by his first name, David, so I will too. Cathy and David were harmlessly flirting. I mean, it can seem harmless, but they were just building each other up here and there, and it felt okay since both of them were married. Yes, David is married too, yet he begins to confide in Cathy about the troubles that he and his wife are going through, and the two begin to bond. Sooner or later, David and Cathy are having lunches together outside of the hospital. It always starts innocent, doesn't it? It's like boundaries. I guess they did exist, but they were becoming more and more blurred. In the spring of 1986, David finally crosses the line and invites Cathy to his place. But wait, it's not the home he shares with his wife. No, instead, to Cathy's surprise, David tells her that he and his wife are actually separated, and he lives in his own apartment near the hospital. Was Cathy thinking about leaving Bill? Well, it turns out when confiding in David, she says yes, she was thinking about it. She had actually attempted to leave once before, but Bill wouldn't let her go. If a couple wants a divorce, they have to go through a legal separation first for a designated amount of time, which is usually defined by the particular state they were married in. For example, here in California, it's a 6-month period, and it varies in different states. So, David and Cathy bond over their marriage difficulties, and David explains he's separated from his wife. The more they see one another alone, the more tension builds, especially in Cathy. She hasn't been close to Bill in a while. He was so controlling and demeaning. In contrast, David was carefree, caring, and gentle. Ultimately, they cross the line. They end up having sex. Of course, they do. If they didn't want this to happen, they should not have allowed it to get to this point alone in David's apartment, where they weren't under the watchful eyes of their colleagues and superiors. Over the next few months, Cathy begins to fall in love with David, and it seems that David feels the same. All the while, Cathy is hiding this from Bill, but he has his suspicions, especially because there are nights that Cathy doesn't make it home until very late, like after midnight. She keeps telling him she's working on a project, but Bill has a feeling she is not telling the truth. Their relationship is strained, they're no longer intimate, and Cathy is just going through the motions. Bill is feeling neglected, possibly betrayed, and begins taking more and more interest in extracurricular activities outside of his work, like his softball league. Cathy goes to his games and notices something different. Bill seems to be getting a little more attention than usual, and he's paying more attention than usual to all of the young cadets that he trains in the Air Force, all the young women. They're cheering him on. This is their drill sergeant, and they're laughing, smiling, and hugging him. It's getting a little too close, in Cathy's opinion, but who is she to pass judgment, right? There is a saying that 2 wrongs don't make a right. What they could have benefited from was some actual communication, but instead, both became cold and distant. Cathy was no longer interested in having sex with Bill. All she could think about was David. People in these love triangles sometimes say they feel like they're cheating on their new lover with their husbands, so they stop having sex with their husbands. We can't ever know exactly what Cathy was feeling, but her actions say a lot. She considered the marriage over. Bill, on the other hand, is not catching on and is not ready to let their marriage completely die. He starts questioning her about where she's going and where she's been, and this doesn't end well. It only leads to arguments. Cathy insists that she's just working and that he should stop interrogating her, but it's becoming harder and harder to keep her affair a secret, mostly because she wants more from David. She wants to be with David, and I don't mean just in his bed. She wants him to commit to her. That same spring of 1986, Cathy thinks of a plan to spend more time with her lover away from Bill, where he cannot monitor what's going on. She decides to register for a medical conference that David's going to, and it's 1,000 miles away. Cathy thought this would be perfect. Now she has a legitimate excuse. She didn't feel like she had to hide anything. She didn't even have to hide David, because when they were away together, they were together. No one knew them 1,000 miles away. There was no social media in 1986 like there is now. No one was taking pictures or videos with their iPhones and sending them to someone's partner as evidence of infidelity. It's just so easy to get caught these days. It's a wonder why anyone even tries to cheat. But back then, it was as though these lovers were in their own worlds. They could walk down the street holding hands, acting like Mr. and Mrs. Dr. Pearl. Cathy was in heaven. She loved David. When he walked into a room, time would stand still. There was just something special about him. Everyone saw it, but she got to experience it, and that gave her a rush that didn't compare to anything else. Even though she was literally cheating with a married man, she found herself imagining what it would be like to be with David, to be his wife. She asked him if they could be together, and he told her he loved spending time with her. It felt right, but he had to wait until his divorce was final. Then, of course, they could be together. There was no question about that. Cathy felt loved, cherished, and listened to. She had someone to confide in and talk to about all her problems, and she looked up to him. He taught her so much about work and life. She was infatuated with David. He was the complete package. He was handsome, smart, hardworking, and fun, and he just got her. When they were together, it was just David and Cathy. Everything was perfect as long as Bill didn't find out. But Bill wasn't oblivious. While Cathy might have been in her own little world with David, Bill was living in reality. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to piece the facts together. The long hours, the smiles, the happiness not coming from him. The trips, Bill had had enough. He begins looking through Cathy's things when she's gone at that conference, and he's devastated by what he finds. My heart really breaks for him in this situation. He's had this aha moment, but it's also a soul-crushing moment that confirms his worst fear. I know that feeling all too well. Your heart starts to race, you can't breathe, your body feels hot, you get dizzy, and you can't think. You just stare. That's what was going on with Bill. He was staring at a packet of birth control pills. At that exact moment, he knew in his heart that Cathy was being unfaithful. Bill had a vasectomy, so there was no need for Cathy to use contraceptives with him. She wasn't even having sex with him anyway. That's really devastating. Cheating is one of the worst betrayals in a relationship. It breaks down everything: the communication, the trust, the vulnerability, and the love. It just extinguishes love in the blink of an eye. Bill puts all the evidence together, and it's obvious who Cathy is having an affair with. Dr. David Pearl, the distinguished medical specialist, a man who made more money than Bill and had a higher education. That felt humiliating to him. This isn't the picture-perfect life he wants to portray to the incoming airman. He's crushed. This isn't just about losing his beautiful, loving wife that he adores, no matter what. It's about what this will look like for his unblemished career. Everything about him was polished from head to toe, yet now his marriage is a mess. As soon as Cathy comes home, he confronts her. She was already ready to lay it all out on the table for him. She had made up her mind. She was in love with David, so she didn't lie. She didn't fight it. She told Bill the truth. She wanted a divorce. Can you imagine the pain Bill must have felt to hear his wife say those words? One part of you wants that confirmation, just to hear them admit they've done something wrong, but it also becomes a harsh reality once it's spoken. Some people can never come back from pain like that. Cathy doesn't hesitate. As soon as the conversation is over with Bill, she goes down and files for divorce. Now listen, I've talked about cheating in a lot of videos. I don't always ask your opinions on it, but there will be many discussions on this topic. I hear the immaturity card pulled as an excuse a lot. While she was a young woman when they got married, maybe she didn't have a lot of life experience, but that was a choice, and so is cheating. Sometimes I wonder why people don't just get a divorce first. At least that's what David was doing, right? He was in the separation stage, but I guess some people may not be able to fight those lustful thoughts. Let me know in the comments. Once the paperwork was filed, Cathy was over the moon with happiness, unlike Bill, who was most likely crying himself to sleep at night. Cathy couldn't wait to share the news with David. The new arrangement between Bill and Cathy was that Cathy would move into her own apartment with the kids, probably got that clue from David, and Bill would have visitation with the children every weekend. The oldest child was about 6 or 7 years old at the time. and I could not find out any more information about their names or anything else. It was the 80s, and I tried to find newspaper articles and stuff, but they kept it kind of under wraps. Things were going as well as could be expected in these circumstances. The visitations are going well. Cathy's enjoying her freedom. She's got her new apartment. Speaking of the apartment, it's Sunday afternoon on June 8th, 1986. Bill has the kids and is ready to bring them back to Cathy. When they arrive at Cathy's place, her car isn't there, but they go up to the door anyway. They knock, but there's no answer. So Bill decides to go back to the car, gets a piece of paper and a pencil, and leaves a note for Cathy to let her know the kids are safe. She wasn't home, so they went back to his place, and she can call or come get them whenever she gets a chance. Remember, there are no cell phones back then. There's no way for Bill to know where Cathy is, and she didn't tell him that she wouldn't be there. He expected her there on Sundays, like she always was when he dropped off the kids. It's not like her to leave without notice or not come back on time to take care of her children. Bill is irritated, but he's not alarmed at this point. However, some people are, her co-workers. As you probably guessed, Cathy did not show up to work the next morning. That was very unusual. It was very out of character for a woman like Cathy, who not only took her job seriously, but was literally dating her boss. She would never be a no-show at work. So her friends start calling around to her family members to check in, but no one has heard from Cathy. Just as the sun is coming up on Monday, June 9th, 1986, it reveals what Cathy's family has been looking for. In northwest Bexar County, just outside the city limits of San Antonio, a man thinks he sees something off the side of the road. It's in a rural area, not heavily populated. Police respond immediately, and when they arrive on the scene, they're confronted with a gruesome sight. There is a naked female with no identification, just her clothes next to her. It doesn't take long for police to identify the body as 29-year-old Kathleen Lipscomb. Her co-workers had been searching for her all day. They had made reports and informed the police that they could not find her. Once it was announced that a body had been located, her co-workers were there to positively identify her. At first glance, there's not much at the crime scene in the way of evidence. They're looking toward the body for clues. One thing that stood out to the investigators immediately was the way Cathy's body looked. She was in a very peculiar position. It wasn't just that she was curled up in a fetal position. Her limbs were actually curled and twisted in a very unnatural way. It's something that the investigators had never seen before, and they wondered why she looked that way. They also noticed a clothesline right next to her body. Looking around for more evidence, it became pretty obvious that she had been dumped at this location. This is not where she was murdered. There were no significant signs like footprints, tire marks, or blood. However, it was apparent that there were bruises and marks around Cathy's neck, which led detectives to believe that she had been strangled and that this was probably the cause of death. At this point, there were no other visible physical wounds on her body, so they transported her to the medical examiner's office for a full autopsy. This is when some additional evidence came to light. But before I get into those details, it's important to jump back and tell you what was happening with her family and friends as they were finding out what happened. It goes without saying, but I will let you know. As soon as her mother and her sister were contacted, they were in shock, in total disbelief about what was happening. Her sister said that there were so many emotions going through her. There's going to be even more shocking news to come because they didn't know that Cathy had some secrets, and all of this will be coming to light as I get more and more into the story. When her friends and family were interviewed, they immediately informed the police that Cathy was going through a divorce with Bill, who was very high up in the Air Force. Immediately, alarm bells started going off. There was something significant at the crime scene, something that stood out. Remember how I told you that Cathy's clothes were next to her? Well, they weren't just thrown next to her body. They were meticulously placed right next to her in a fashion that was very distinctive. They were rolled. I don't know if you've ever seen the way individuals in the military roll their clothing to fit into their backpacks and other places to save space, This is called a ranger role. I'm going to show you an example of it right here on the screen. Like I said, people in the military do this to save room in their backpacks. You can fit a lot more in there if you roll up your clothes. This is a huge clue. Clearly, whoever did this must be in the military. It was a force of habit, they do it all the time, and they must have done it again in this state of mind. They're rushing to drop Cathy's body off, but why even leave her clothes there? Maybe Bill has some answers because he is the first one they call in for questioning. As soon as they let him know what happened and that Cathy was dead, he is in shock. There was a total look on his face like he could not believe this was happening. He turns white as a ghost, unable to understand how it could be possible. He tells them that he and the kids went over to her apartment the night before and she was nowhere to be found. He told them about the note he left for her. Of course, they're always going to suspect the partner, and not only that, he's in the military, so that links him right away to the way the clothing was folded. They were going through a divorce, so of course they're going to look at the husband. Bill is distraught. He's upset, talking about how he's been looking all over for her. He says, "I have nothing to do with it." When they press him about the affair with Dr. Pearl, which they had heard about from Cathy's co-workers during interviews, Bill admits, "Yeah, I know. I'm aware of the affair. I'm aware of everything that's going on, and I'm okay with it. I understand there's nothing I can do. Cathy's free to do what she wants. Those were her wishes." He says he's accepted the fact that Cathy has moved on, and there was nothing he could do about it. Next, the police want to see if there's anything unusual about Bill's appearance. Does it look like he's been scratched? Are there marks on his hands? Any defensive wounds or anything that would suggest a sign of a struggle? But they couldn't find anything. No bruises, no scratches. It didn't look like he had been involved in any kind of attack. Bill also provides an alibi. He was at home with his kids that weekend, including the night Cathy disappeared. Sadly, they do have to bring the children in for questioning, and both confirm that they were with their father the entire weekend. Bill also tells them to check with his second-in-command, Staff Sergeant Nicholas Richards, as he had also been with Bill all day. At this point, they can't spend all their time looking at just one person, especially someone who holds a high position in the military and who has literally made that his life. Bill isn't the type of person who would just go around doing things wrong. This man lives for perfection. So they decide to interview some of his colleagues, the people on his team at work. All of them tell the police that Bill would have nothing to do with anything like this. They go to Lackland Air Force Base and interview Nicholas. He confirms that, yes, he was with Bill all day on Sunday, hanging out at his place with the kids. Meanwhile, investigators are getting critical information elsewhere, so they shift their attention from Bill to someone else, the other man in Cathy's life. They go down to the hospital to interview Cathy's co-workers. They had already told the investigators about the affair with Dr. Pearl, but there's more. After telling the police everything I already mentioned, that Cathy was infatuated with him, that she was in love with him, that they went on vacations disguised as conferences and paraded their relationship around, they drop a bombshell on the investigators, something no one was expecting. Cathy wasn't the only one. That's right. Poor Cathy risked everything to be with David, but David wasn't really risking much. He had the upper hand in the relationship, not only with Cathy but with several other women he worked with. This man was hooking up with different nurses, doing the same things he did with Cathy. He took them to conferences, had them over to his apartment, and allowed them to fall in love with him, none of them knowing about the others. But it wasn't much of a surprise to people on the outside. They had been watching it all unfold. Maybe Cathy was in denial. She either didn't have a clue, or she was so blinded by infatuation that she didn't realize what was really going on. She had no idea what the truth was. I feel like this poor woman was manipulated, tricked. Her whole world was turned upside down on a promise that was never real. It takes two to tango, as the saying goes. I'm sure you've heard that before. And it wasn't just Cathy. This man knew what he was doing because he had done it time and time again. He had used his position of power to entice these nurses to come home with him and begin relationships. It turns out, He would tell every woman that he was going through a separation, but all along, that wasn't the case. The shocking part of it all had just come to Cathy. She had just found out that David was living a lie. When she filed for divorce from Bill, she was excited, and the first person she wanted to share that excitement with was David. But when she met with him to share the news, he said he wasn't ready to settle down with her, and Cathy was crushed. She didn't understand what was going on. For all we know, her very first relationship in life could have been with Bill. Cathy wanted answers, so she started digging into David's life. That's when she found out about all the other women. He didn't have any intention of committing to Cathy. He was just stringing her along like he did with every other woman. In fact, he wasn't even going through a divorce at all, and he had no plans to leave his wife. She had no idea any of this was going on. As far as she knew, they were happily married. David was actually a pretty perfect husband, aside from his cheating. He did everything for his wife. She had the house, the car, the kids, anything she wanted, the lavish lifestyle. Cathy confronted David, and at this point, she was desperate. Desperate times call for desperate measures. She threatened to expose David to his wife, saying that she would do anything to make David hers. She told him, "If you don't divorce your wife like you told me you would, and be with me, I'm going to tell her. I'm going to tell her about us, and I'm going to tell her everything else I found out." But David was bold and said, "No, go ahead, I'm not leaving my wife." This must have been an incredible situation for Cathy, finding herself desperate like that. She probably thought, if I tell his wife she's gonna leave him and he'll be out with the trash, I don't want you anymore, and then Cathy could swoop in and make David hers. But it gets worse. The investigators called David in for questioning, but before that I want to go back to the autopsy report because I left you hanging. There's something they found that was very important. They found 4 red strands of hair on the clothing next to Cathy's body. They also determined that the cause of death was strangulation. But beyond that, there was a crucial clue that put Dr. Pearl right in their crosshairs, and at the top of their suspect list. They found semen in and on Cathy's body. They determined that Cathy had sex within 24 hours of her murder, and the bruises found on her body were thought to be signs of a struggle, suggesting that the intercourse could have been forced against her will. An interesting fact in this case, one that I hadn't heard in others I've done, is that when they examined the contents of Cathy's stomach, they found undigested Chinese food. This meant she had eaten a short time before her death. There were also ant bites on her legs, and since ant activity in that area happens during the day, they inferred that Cathy was probably placed at the location in the early morning hours, perhaps around 2 or 3 o'clock on Monday morning, when it was still dark. This suggested that Cathy died on Sunday night, the night she went missing, and specifically around dinner time on Sunday, the same night Bill couldn't find her. When they took those 4 strands of red human hair, they placed them under a microscope and noticed that the hairs had no roots. Typically, DNA is extracted from the root to establish a positive match, but they couldn't do that in this case. When they magnified the strands 100 times, they noticed the hair was dyed. This was important because now they had something they could compare to potential suspects. While the hair wasn't naturally red and lacked the root for definitive DNA matching, they could still compare it to other hair samples they found, setting them side by side to magnify and analyze for similarities. Beyond that, there was nothing else at the crime scene to go on. Keep in mind, this was 1986, and forensic testing was still in its infancy. There wasn't much to work with in terms of comparative analysis. Now, before I return to Dr. David Pearl being called in for questioning, there's something else that happened. When police arrived at Cathy's apartment to inspect the premises, her car was still missing, but they did find the note Bill had left on the door. They opened it, and it simply stated that she wasn't there, that he had the kids, and they were safe, and that she could call or come pick them up as soon as she got home. But now, they're actually canvassing that apartment complex. They're going door to door, asking anyone if they saw anything out of the ordinary. And it turns out there was something peculiar happening over there in regard to Cathy's next-door neighbor, a man named Vincent. He happened to be a nurse at the same hospital that worked closely with Cathy. And this man is gone. He left town, moved out of the apartment the same day that Cathy went missing, and he didn't even give any appropriate notice to work. They didn't even have a forwarding address to send him his last paycheck, and they thought that was very suspicious. But not only that, another neighbor comes forward and says that she saw an unfamiliar red-headed woman come knocking on Cathy's door the day after her disappearance. No one answered the door, so this woman just walked away without saying a word. Remember, there were 4 strands of red hair found on Cathy's clothing, so this is strange. They make it a point to focus their attention on trying to locate both of these individuals. Meanwhile, they get Dr. David Perlin for questioning, but guess what? He's not alone. His wife Linda is with him. Yes, the supportive wife is right by his side. Not only that, David doesn't seem fazed when he hears that Cathy has been killed. His demeanor is cold, and he reacts to the questions with precise answers, not giving up too much information. He does so quickly and simply, and like cut and dry, admits that he had an affair. He does this in front of his wife, who he probably already told, and he says, "Yes, I was with Cathy that weekend, and I was with her on Saturday night." He may have been the last person to see her alive. While David's admitting all this, Linda is by his side, and it's clear to detectives that she has no intention of leaving her wealthy doctor husband. It's so painfully obvious that she's not going to leave him that they even start to think she may have been involved in some way. Jealousy is definitely a huge motivator, not to mention the way that Cathy was killed. Strangulation can be a personal crime. This could have been related to the love triangle that Cathy unknowingly found herself in. Detectives think Linda has way more to lose than anyone else. She would lose her husband, her luxury lifestyle, and it turns out David doesn't even stay at that apartment that he brings women to. No, he comes home to Linda every single night. They wonder if David and Linda were in on it together. They think that maybe Cathy was being silenced. Detectives try to press the couple, and they clam up. They tell them, "We're not talking about anything else unless we have an attorney," and that's not a good sign. The interview ended so abruptly, so now the detectives have to turn back to the evidence that they already have. The information they gathered about the suspicious redhead and the neighbor. It turns out the neighbor just happened to get out of a relationship that same weekend. He and his boyfriend got into an argument the weekend that Cathy was murdered, so he picked up and moved away to another part of Texas. His leaving had nothing to do with Cathy's death, just a coincidence. But what about the redhead? That can't be a coincidence, right? They found red hairs at the scene, but it turns out that was a coworker. They dropped by to check on Cathy the day she didn't show up for work. Still, it doesn't explain the red hairs on the clothing. But let's move forward. A week after finding Cathy's body, her car is finally located. It was abandoned in a parking lot nearby. They didn't find anything of significance inside the vehicle, unfortunately. There wasn't anything to move forward on, and the case goes cold. No one is connected to Cathy's murder for 2 whole years. 2 years go by without any answers. Cathy's mother, Nadine, and sister Darlene are at their wits' end. They decide to hire their own private investigator named Tom Bevins. He's actually known as Detective Death. He's the one that families go to when police cannot find their loved one's killers. They have faith in Tom. They think that he's going to be the one to track this killer down. The first thing he does is go back all the way down that line of any suspects they had. He also wants all of the personal items that were collected from Cathy's apartment. There were personal items taken from Cathy's apartment, and they've been stored as evidence. During the 2 years that the case was cold, Bill remarried to a woman named Beverly, and he and the children moved to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Dr. Perlin is still working as the director of the OBGYN department at the hospital, and no one has been charged in Cathy's murder. As Tom is sifting through all of Cathy's personal effects, a diary catches his eye. It's more of a date book, something she used to keep track of her daily activities, her thoughts, everything. It was very important to her. She never left home without it. She used it every single day. Tom goes through every single entry, and 2 of them have additional notations on them that stand out to him. One said, "Went to Bill's ball game. Lisa was there, by the way." Some shows I watched said this woman's name was Lisa, and others said Shannon. I'm gonna go with Lisa since one of the reports that I relied on for factual information had other things correct, while others did not, and the one that was correct used Lisa. So, Lisa it is. Tom wants to know who this Lisa is. Why would Cathy be writing down another woman's name? This was in the same time frame that things were going downhill in her marriage to Bill, sometime in the spring of 1986. The other passage that stood out simply stated, numerous calls and nights out passing information around concerning the WAPS testing. Bill has all the questions for the test. Tom has no idea what this test was, but I referred to it in the beginning. It's the weighted airman promotion test, which all military personnel must pass in order to gain promotion. Armed with this new information, Tom tries to track down Lisa. His first stop, Lackland Air Force Base. Tom calls and asks if anyone knows if there is a Lisa there that was connected to Bill or Cathy. Sure enough, someone puts him in contact with a Lisa Johnson. Lisa was a young cadet who was enlisted while Bill was a drill sergeant. She was very pretty and spent a lot of time around Bill. She was actually one of his biggest fans. It's true, she was one of those women at Bill's softball game that Cathy attended, the ones that were giving him a little more attention than usual. It was obvious to those around Bill that Lisa had a thing for him. Bill was off limits, not only because he was married, but because of his high position, and that was exciting for a young woman like Lisa. She actually made it her mission to somehow get close to him, like coming out to his softball games and cheering him on. She was known to be wild and fun and exciting. She would just come to these games, cheer him on, give him a big hug, tell him he's doing great, and build up his ego. Actually, many people who didn't know Bill and Cathy thought that Bill and Lisa were a couple. They were seen a number of times on and off base, so everyone was aware that Cathy was seeing Dr. Pearl, but this was the first time they heard that Bill was seeing anyone. And now he's already remarried to yet another woman, so it's a little confusing. Tom gets in touch with Lisa and tells her what the call is in reference to, and she immediately gets emotional. She admits, "I had a sexual relationship with Bill." There were times when Bill was going through things with Cathy, and this woman would attempt to come to his rescue. She inflated his ego and built him up. One afternoon, she decided to make her move. She knew that Bill and Cathy had gotten into an argument, so she invited Bill back to her place, and that was the first time of many that they were intimate. Well, that's against the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Bill was not supposed to be engaging in this type of conduct. It could cost him his career. So they did what they could to keep it quiet. As fulfilling as it was to fill this void that Bill had with his wife leaving him, Lisa was merely a distraction. It didn't fix anything. Bill's relationship with Lisa was just one of convenience. She was there, and he just needed a warm body. However, Bill's relationship with Lisa was one of the things that pushed Cathy to divorce him. Yes, I know she was also having an affair, but it turns out, as investigators were digging deeper and interviewing her coworkers and her family, Bill was not a nice man. Bill was controlling, he was belittling. He did this to her for years. They were married for 8 years, and most of those years consisted of Bill controlling every aspect of Cathy's life. She had had enough. Her family described her as very soft, caring, generous, and sweet. All she wanted was a man to love her. All she wanted was to raise her children and be with someone who actually cared. It's sad that in the end, she falls for a guy who doesn't. But all the while, Bill is also having an affair. When she witnessed the two of them together at that ball game, she knew in her gut it was a sign to call it quits and move on. When Tom questioned Lisa, she immediately says that she's going to need an attorney. But with her attorney present, she begins to tell Tom what she knows. She says that Bill had told her he wanted to kill Cathy, and it wasn't because of the affair. It was because of another kind of cheating. That's when Lisa shed light on another passage from the diary, the one regarding Bill knowing the answers to the WAPS test. Lisa was insinuating that Bill was cheating on the exam. This is huge. It was too much for Tom to take on by himself, since these cheating allegations involve the Air Force. They had to call in Dr. Charles McDowell, He joins the investigation as part of the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Together, he and Tom uncover even more information about Bill. For one, he took out a $315,000 life insurance policy on Cathy 7 months before her murder. That time frame isn't as suspicious as some time frames that we've talked about, and that I've seen, but he was living off of this money with his new bride Beverly, and they definitely flaunted it. When they pressed Lisa about the WAPS answers, she caved. She had to. This was vital information and way bigger than they thought. It turns out that this man who walked around all high and mighty wasn't just a cheater in the bedroom. He wasn't just a cheater when it came to ranking in the Air Force. He was running an entire cheating scam. Yes, unreal. Apparently, he had gone together with other men in the Air Force, and they exchanged notes. Now they were selling the answers for a high price. This scheme was spreading all over the United States. Lisa says that Cathy knew all about it. All it would take was one phone call to the base commander, and it would ruin Bill's entire career. It would ruin his life. Apparently, the first time that Cathy asked for a divorce, she didn't have any leverage to make it happen. But the second time, she was armed with this incriminating information about her husband. There's no doubt that he gave in to all of her demands in lieu of her revealing his illegal operation. They were running a cheating ring, and they were charging a lot. I'm talking, this was like a whole career in and of itself on the side. When they asked Lisa if she thinks Bill killed Cathy, she says, "You know what? You better find Nicholas Richards." She tells them that he's involved in the cheating ring as well. Well, the cheating scandal is exposed. Nicholas is now facing a dishonorable discharge, and he's a mess. He doesn't waste any time confessing everything that he knows. The first thing he says is that he has nothing to do with her murder, but he knows who did, and he helped move the body. Oh my God, wait till you hear this. Wait till you hear what he tells these investigators. He tells them that he talked to Bill on the phone the weekend before June 9th, 1986. Nicholas says that Bill calls him and asks him to watch the kids so that he can meet with Cathy to discuss some things about the divorce. So Nick takes the kids to dinner on Sunday, and when this man brings the kids back, Bill's like, "Can you tuck them in? Can you put them to bed?" After that, this is just, I can't believe that people can just do this stuff. But he calls Nick into a room, pulls him aside, and stands in front of a small wooden cedar chest. He slowly opens it up and reveals Cathy's dead body. He just looks at him and goes, "You know what you need to do, because Cathy was going to expose their scheme. She had to go." Since Nicholas is Bill's partner in this scandal, he feels like it is his responsibility to dispose of her. So he waits until it's dark, drives out of the city, opens up the back of his vehicle, and dumps her on the side of the road, leaving those clothes folded beside her. However, he kept that wooden box and tells detectives that there are bloodstains in there. Now it makes sense. Remember Cathy's legs and arms? How they were twisted into this very unnatural position. It was because she was crammed into this small box, and once rigor mortis set in, she was already in this awkward position, and there was nothing they could do to unravel her. This poor woman, that's horrific. And if that's not bad enough, they call in Bill's daughter. Now she's 9 years old, and when she's being interviewed again, she tells them that she knows who killed her mom. It was her dad, because he wasn't where he said he was on the night that Mommy died. She said that she woke up in the middle of the night and he was gone, and so was his car. This seems like it would be enough, but it's all circumstantial. They need a confession, and Nick agrees to wear a wire. He makes a deal with the Air Force. In exchange for getting information or a confession from Bill, he doesn't have to serve any time. Like he's basically going to get away with his part in all this. Well, they agree, and he wears a wire. He calls Bill up and says, "You know what? We need to talk about this scandal because I'm being demoted." They meet in person, but no matter what Nick says to try to get Bill to crack, he just changes the conversation. Bill even tells Nicholas, "You know what? You're looking rough. I'll take care of everything." He hands him an envelope of cash and tells him to get out of the country for a little while. They've got nothing concrete until Nick admits he still has the wooden chest that he placed Cathy's body in, And that is when the conversation changes. Bill freaks out. He's like, "You need to get rid of it. You need to get rid of that now." So, this is the evidence that the authorities need. They've got their killer. All along, it was Cathy's estranged husband, Bill. He would do anything to keep his ego intact, anything not to be found out, anything to stay on top, even kill the mother of his children. But wait, you have to hear what happens next. On July 10th, 1989, 3 years after her death, investigators arrest Bill for the murder of his wife. The trial is set for June 20th, 1990. But before the trial starts, Bill pleads guilty because he wants to avoid the death penalty. He wrote out a stipulation of facts outlining this chilling chain of events that led to his wife's murder. And I'm going to tell them to you, and I want you to tell me what you think because I have my thoughts. But here's what he says happened. Bill said he asked Cathy to come over to his place to go through some family photos. He's insinuating that none of this was planned. When she got there, she was going through them. They got in an argument because she said she wanted to cut Bill out of the photos. Apparently, she took a pair of scissors and started to do so right in front of him. That's when he said he got enraged because of everything. Because of the cheating, because of the doctor. It was all going through his head. The divorce, the custody of the kids, the leverage that Cathy had, and she flaunted around about exposing everything. His cheating scheme, and he just snapped. He says, "I didn't mean to kill her. I just started to attack her." He knew that she was going to go to his superiors, and he was going to be charged with battery. Everything was going to end anyway, and it was going to end badly. When this realization hit him, he just went all the way, and he ended up strangling her with a cord. He even had intercourse with her to make it look like it was a random attack. Bill was sentenced to life in prison, but in an unexpected turn of events, the military decided that they were going to take over the case, and they gave him 60 years instead at the disciplinary barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Wow, he goes from the death penalty being on the table to life in prison to the military taking over and getting 60 years. He was eligible for parole since 1998. I hate to tell you this, I really do, but he was actually released just last year in May of 2021. So Bill walks free, only serving 32 years. Nicholas Richards didn't get charged with anything. The only thing that happened to him was that he was dishonorably discharged. I'm shocked. This beautiful young mother of two was taken away for reasons that should not warrant murder. It's true that she made mistakes, but that should never be the answer. She left behind her two precious little children, and they will forever live with the fact that they lost both of their parents when Bill made that fateful decision to take Cathy's life. College senior Mindy Morgenstern was taking one last class at her university before graduating and following her dreams of working in athletics. She just moved into a new apartment off campus. She was dating a new guy and was looking forward to a modeling shoot the day her friends discovered the most terrifying and unexpected scene behind the door of apartment number 9. This is a crazy case. It's an unbelievable story. It's one that sticks with you and scares you. So I can only imagine what it felt like for the people involved. Let's get into the story for today. Today, I want to introduce you to the Morgenstern family. It started with Larry Morgenstern, who married Eunice Bauer. After their wedding, the newlyweds began taking over Larry's family farm in the exact farmhouse where his mother was born, out in rural New Salem, North Dakota. They were lifelong residents and Stestender. This is North Dakota, and New Salem is a quiet, friendly city with a strong sense of community. The economy of New Salem is based on agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism, thanks to the proximity of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. But after some time enjoying the married life, the couple decided they wanted to start a family. Larry was 25 and Eunice was only 22 at the time. By November of 1975, they were welcoming their first child into the world, and they named her Rebecca Morgenstern. They loved Rebecca so very much, but not too long after she was born, the couple felt as though there was something missing from their life. They knew they wanted another child, and in their hearts, they felt like they should adopt a child and give them the love that they deserve. They adopted a little boy named Michael, who was very close in age to their biological daughter, Rebecca. At the time, I think he was about a year older than her, so he fit right into the Morgenstern household. Michael was treated no differently than Rebecca. Biological or not, these were Larry and Eunice's children. Their world revolved around making sure that they knew they were loved and giving them everything they needed to thrive. Once Rebecca and Michael were no longer babies, Larry and Eunice missed having little ones around. Rebecca was about 10 years old at the time, and the Morgensterns felt as though they still had so much love to give to a child in need. So again, they turned to adoption. They had had such an amazing experience the first time around. They were so excited to bring another child into their life, and actually they wanted 2 more children. So they could not wait to welcome them into their home and shower them with love and affection. They were notified of a little girl that was coming up for adoption. Her name was April, and she was living out in Colombia. So they flew out to meet this beautiful toddler, and they knew right away they wanted to bring her home to the United States. She was perfect, and she fit right in, and they felt like their family really was complete. But again, they had it in their hearts to open up their home to another child if another child in need matched with the couple. It wasn't long before the adoption agency reached out to inform them that little April had a biological sister who was up for adoption. She was just an infant when Eunice met her in Colombia for the very first time. It was love at first sight, really. Her name was Mindy. She was born April 29th, 1984. Both Eunice and Larry were captivated by Mindy's beautiful big dark brown eyes. Mindy's eyes first. They were the biggest, darkest, most beautiful eyes that she had ever seen. And once she held her in her arms, she knew she never wanted to let her go. When they brought Mindy home from Colombia, the Morgensterns were officially a family of 6, and they were loving every minute of it. You can tell how loved Mindy was from her childhood photos, how happy she was with her family. Just look at that big smile. She loved her daddy. Larry said that even as a baby, Mindy was quite a character. He remembered when they brought her home, it changed their lives forever. She was loud and happy and fun. She'd be laughing all the time, running around like crazy. She loved being outdoors, where she could get all of that energy out. While growing up in rural North Dakota, April and Mindy stood out from their peers. They had that glowing caramel skin, and it set them apart from all the other kids in their class. So there's a good and a bad to this. Standing out could be great, but at that age, children began teasing April and Mindy, giving them a hard time for the way they looked and for their differences. But their big sister, Rebecca, dealt with it right away. Rebecca told the youngsters to back off. Those were her little sisters, and Rebecca fiercely protected April and Mindy. She wanted her classmates to understand they were just like everyone else, and she was determined to ensure that her sisters were not treated any differently because of the way that they looked. But soon, even the meanest kids began to have a soft spot for little Mindy. Her bright, bubbly personality, her contagious enthusiasm, sense of humor, and her willingness to help others won them over time and time again. Working on the farm was a favorite pastime of Mindy's growing up. The Morgensterns taught their children to care for their land and instilled a strong work ethic in them. Mindy's favorite activities included helping with the harvest, tending to the gardens, and caring for the animals. These experiences gave her a great appreciation for the environment and how to value working hard. So from a young age, Larry actually taught Mindy how to drive a tractor. Soon she was out there in the field, lifting bales of hay and helping with all the chores. He took great pride in watching his daughter progress. He was so proud. When Mindy was old enough and capable enough to tend to the farm on her own, aside from milking cows and raising chickens, she would adopt stray cats and dogs and take care of them. She absolutely loved animals, and she was very active growing up. Mindy loved to play sports. She was on the basketball team, participated in track, and was a cheerleader in high school. She was known for her competitive spirit and ability to rally her teammates to victory. In addition to being a very skilled athlete, Mindy played the clarinet in the marching band. She was into everything. And no matter how grown up she was, Mindy remained the baby of the family, and she was the center of attention. Rebecca, being about 10 years older than Mindy, had been dating a guy named Jason, and the pair got married when Mindy was only 12 years old. They would all gather around for family dinners, which were a big deal in this household. Jason was always amused by the fact that Mindy was the one sitting at the head of the table. It wasn't her parents, it was her. She would keep the conversation going and make everyone laugh, because making people happy was Mindy's gift. She had a knack for bringing joy to everyone around her. When she was around, everything was more fun. As Mindy grew up, her mom referred to her as a tomboy because she was tough and athletic, which came from working on the farm. But as she got older, Eunice saw her change so much. Eunice said that she just got so beautiful in her mother's eyes, and she turned heads everywhere she went. It wasn't just her mama who thought she was beautiful. When she became a teenager, she actually started dabbling in modeling on the weekends. She wasn't quite aware of her beautiful looks, though, and that's what was very impressive about her. Mindy's personality matched her stunning looks. Her inner beauty only highlighted what was on the outside. But no matter how beautiful or busy Mindy became, there was one thing in her life that was always her top priority: her faith. She grew up attending Zion Lutheran Church, and Mindy lived her life based on the teachings of Jesus Christ. She put God first in all of her decisions and was motivated to be a good example to others. Her faith was her source of strength during difficult times, and she was surrounded by God's message, especially because Rebecca's husband, Jason, became a pastor. Soon, they had kids of their own, and Mindy loved to babysit and play with her nieces and nephews. She was so close to her family that it was a hard decision for her on where she should go to college. She knew she wanted to become either a basketball coach or a physical therapist, and she was also interested in doing missionary work. Basketball, though, was her passion. Her inspiration was Michael Jordan. She loved the way he played, his attitude, and she thought he was pretty good looking. Mindy and April would play basketball in front of their farmhouse all the time, sometimes late into the night, even after midnight. Mindy would always try to imitate Michael Jordan's moves. So with all that being said, all of her passions and everything she wanted to do, she was looking for somewhere close by that also had all the things she was looking for in a college. The closest college that was in the top 3 in the state and had a physical education major was almost 200 miles away in Valley City. It was Valley City State University, but Mindy felt that this was where she needed to be. She was accepted and enrolled right after graduating from New Salem High School in 2002. Mindy was truly looking forward to all the new experiences and the opportunity to develop her identity away from all the familiar places and people she had known her whole life. However, she was also nervous about leaving her family and friends and adjusting to an entirely new environment. Valley City is a small college town in North Dakota with only about 6,000 residents, 2,000 of whom attend the college at the heart of the city, coming there for that purpose alone. It's known to be a safe place to live, and the community is well known for being very friendly and welcoming. Mindy was 18 and getting ready for life on campus. She took her old green baby blanket with her because she felt safe with it, and it reminded her of home. On the day her mom dropped her off at the dorms, she was struggling. Mindy didn't want to stay. She wanted to go home. Eunice understood that this was a big change for Mindy. She was leaving home for the very first time, and it felt scary and overwhelming. But Eunice did her best to reassure Mindy it would be okay. After her mom left her at the dorms, she saw Mindy chasing after her car, flagging her down. Eunice pulled over, and she said, "What's wrong?" Mindy told her, "Mom, I just cannot do this." Eunice replied, "Relax, take a deep breath, inhale, exhale." Finally, Mindy calmed down and said, "All right, Mama," and returned to her room. Hearing that breaks my heart because as a parent, I don't ever want to let my daughter go. But at the same time, we know that they have to become independent, and they have to have these experiences in life. This was a great learning experience. Besides, Mindy had a piece of home at Valley City. Her childhood best friend, Ashley Wallace, had decided to go to the same college. They were going there together, and I could tell they were best friends by the way they both did their eyeshadow. It's one of the first things I actually noticed about Mindy as I was looking through all of the pictures of her from college. I noticed that she wore a shiny white shadow as a base with a high, dark sort of cut crease in the middle. It was very unique. I think it probably made her stand out even more back then. It was very bold, a signature look for her, something that I don't think you could miss or forget, and it obviously inspired her friends to do the same. Ashley joining her at Valley City State University made Mindy's transition a little easier. Having Ashley there was a reminder of home. It provided Mindy with comfort and familiarity in this new environment. Ashley was essential in helping Mindy adjust to college life. She gave her that emotional support as she navigated this new world. But it didn't take long for Mindy to become very popular on campus and beyond. She was a big fish in the small pond she called home. Within the first week of school, her friends said she already knew everyone on campus. That was her gift. However, she did have a couple of very good friends that she spent more time with than others. Her two new best friends, Tony Bauman and Danielle Hallstrom. Another thing I say in a lot of these cases when I'm describing the person I'm introducing you to is that I'll tell you what her friends thought of her. Sometimes, in memes and other things I saw online, I swear, even reading the comment section, I notice that people think these things can sound cliché. We've heard them all before. She had a strikingly beautiful smile that just lit up a room. Another viewer is definitely clicking off. I get that. The same lines are reused again and again, like, she was a loyal friend, she had a contagious smile and laugh. It goes on and on. But the thing is, we're hearing from the people who loved them, the people who knew these individuals and cared about them, the individuals that were the closest to them. We don't know them, we're just hearing about them for the very first time. And of course, there's the saying not to speak ill of the dead. So would we really bring up bad qualities about someone who had to suffer a horrifying murder? I think the answer is no. But in this case, I'm going to tell you what Mindy's friends thought of her. They thought the world of her. About your own life and one of your best friends, what would you say if you lost them? You can imagine why certain attributes, characteristics, and phrases are used to describe someone gone too soon that they cared about so much. Mindy's friends said that she was a great listener. She was always there for her friends. She cared about them and what was going on in their lives, and she gave them the best advice whenever they needed her. They knew they could always turn to Mindy when they needed a shoulder to cry on, an ear to listen, or just someone to genuinely have a good time with. Mindy was a girl's girl. She had a lot of really good girlfriends. One thing that drew people to Mindy was her non-judgmental personality. It was easy to open up to her because she was compassionate and understanding. Mindy was the one you would call in the middle of the night, and she truly would jump out of bed and stop whatever she was doing, even stop sleeping, to help you out. Tony and Mindy worked together at Tony's family's restaurant, Robbie's, where Mindy was a waitress, which suited her personality very well. Even though she had a good time with Tony and Danielle, she was more of a homebody compared to her friends. She was the more serious and grounded one of the group. Every Sunday, she would get up for church. She would wake her friends up and ask them to go with her. Because she sang in the choir, she volunteered with kids whenever she got the chance. She was either at church or studying. Her faith was about to become even more important to her. During her freshman year, Mindy was interested in trying out for college sports, but she began having some unusual symptoms and needed to get a routine physical. During this time, she received some very shocking news, life-changing news. She was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. That's a chronic disease of the central nervous system. It's also a very unpredictable disease that affects people differently. Symptoms of MS include numbness, tingling, extreme fatigue, and difficulty with coordination and balance. That's really sad, especially for someone like Mindy, who is so active. In its most severe form, MS can even cause paralysis and loss of vision. Currently, there's no cure for it, but treatments are available to help reduce some of the symptoms and slow the progression of the disease. And as I said, for someone like Mindy, who had dreams of working in the sports industry, this was really devastating news. But Mindy found strength in her faith, and she was determined not to let her diagnosis define her. However, it did change her life. 1, it made her faith stronger, and 2, it gave her a new purpose. She wanted to participate in clinical trials for new treatments to help people in the future. So she applied to become part of a trial to find a cure. Meanwhile, she was committed to inspiring others to live a healthy life, doing speeches around campus and at the local high school about the value of physical fitness. There was something else helping Mindy: her boyfriend, Kyle Cusney. They met during homecoming weekend, and Kyle was very popular at Valley City. He was actually crowned homecoming king and was a junior at the time. Kyle was athletic, well-grounded in his faith, and hardworking. Mindy really liked him, and they clicked right away. The night they met, they just started chatting and hanging out. They had some pizza together and talked for the next couple of hours, and the relationship just grew from there. Over the next couple of years, Mindy's family got to know Kyle very well, and they liked him a lot, especially because of how much Mindy loved him. She thought that he was perfect for her. Mindy told her mom she was going to marry Kyle one day. She really wanted a future with him. She already had her wedding dress kind of picked out and was planning their wedding before he even proposed. She even had their wedding song picked out, but that never happened because Kyle broke her heart. They dated for 2.5 years, but remember, Kyle was already a junior when they met. After he graduated, it was harder for them to see one another. Mindy was busy with classes, and Kyle was taking the next steps in his career. Then he ended up moving over an hour away. Long distance was too hard, and Kyle broke it off. It was hard on Mindy because she believed that everything happened for a reason. She tried her best to move on, but it wasn't long before she caught the eye of a local farmer boy, Jordan Raynham. The pair seemed to have a lot in common. It's always nice to have someone there when you're feeling down, alone, and heartbroken. He had a very similar upbringing on the farm and in faith, and they actually met at church in October of 2004. He was clean-cut, hard-working, soft-spoken, but he was definitely the opposite of Mindy when it came to being outgoing. But that helped ground her at times. He liked to take her to visit his family, and all of her friends knew that he was a really wonderful guy to Mindy. However, a few of them said that he was a lot more serious about Mindy than she was about him. She wasn't over Kyle, not at all. She was hoping that somehow, some way, she and Kyle would find their way back to one another. But at this point, she was open to a new relationship with Jordan, so they started seeing more and more of one another until they became official. They were still together in the fall of 2005 when Mindy entered her final year of college. She had just a handful of classes left, but she was about to get some bittersweet news. She was a candidate for a new clinical trial of an experimental chemotherapy medication for MS. But in order to receive the infusions, she would need to limit her contact with as many people as possible, which was very hard to do for someone as social as Mindy. However, she knew that it was for the greater good. She hoped that by getting these experimental infusions of the medication, she could ultimately help future patients who were suffering from this condition. Doctors thought that living in the dorms on campus would expose Mindy to illnesses, so she decided to get her own apartment close to school. She found one that she really liked. It was only 5 minutes away at 515 8th Street, Apartment 9. This is where she called home. Her friends were surprised that someone as much of a social butterfly as Mindy was going to be able to live by herself, but they understood her reasons. She had to do this for her health. Mindy felt really safe in this new apartment building. She had scoped out many different places to live, and this particular building actually had a few police officers living in the building as well as around the neighborhood surrounding her apartment. She would always see these officers around, and it made her feel safe. It was a great location, close to school, work, and church, everything. She took pride in decorating it with pictures of all the people she loved. She had picture frames on almost every wall of her one-bedroom, one-bathroom apartment. By the spring of 2006, Mindy was now 22 years old and undergoing the medical infusions for the clinical trials. She had one class left before graduating in December. So that brings us to the evening of September 13th, 2006. Mindy's two best friends, Tony and Danielle, wanted to go out for some drinks that night, but there was a problem. Tony's boyfriend, James, didn't really like Tony going out with certain friends like Danielle. There wasn't anything wrong with Danielle, it's just that Tony would get into a little too much trouble when the two hung out together. I think we've all had that one friend with whom we have just a little too much fun. It's usually harmless, but could rub someone the wrong way. Mindy, on the other hand, was level-headed, responsible, and the good girl in the friend group. She didn't party a lot or partake in, party favors, if you know what I mean, like some of the other college kids did. So if James thought that Tony was with Mindy, he wouldn't keep bothering her all night. So she lied. She said she was going over to Mindy's that night to hang out, but Tony's boyfriend had heard that line a few too many times. He really wasn't buying it. He was like, you know what? Let me talk to Mindy. So now they knew they were going to get caught in their lie if they didn't quickly drive over to Mindy's real fast, because they knew she would cover for them. The reason Tony knew Mindy would cover for her was that she really didn't like James. She thought Tony was too good for him and would give her honest advice that they should probably break up. So Tony and Danielle were trying to come up with a plan. As they were driving to Mindy's apartment, they thought, okay, maybe we could get Mindy to agree to come out to the bar and just kind of hang out with us. She could be there whenever Tony's boyfriend called back. Then Mindy could kind of chime in and say, I'm right here. Or maybe it would just be enough for her to stay home but jump on the phone real fast with James so that Mindy could say, yeah, I'm going to hang out with Tony, and that would be that. Tony kept calling Mindy to tell her the plan and to let her know they were on their way. But the thing is, she wasn't answering her phone, which was strange. There was urgency. Danielle and Tony wanted to have a fun night, and it just seemed like everything was standing in their way. And now their alibi, Mindy, wasn't answering, so they were frustrated. Both girls were calling her back to back, but neither one could reach her. They were leaving messages. Tony got the voicemail and said, hey, me and Danny are looking for you. We can't get a hold of you. But she didn't call back. Still nothing. They arrived at Mindy's a little before 9 p.m. and Tony spotted Mindy's car parked on the street, so they figured she must be home. They parked, Danielle stayed in the car, and Tony ran up to Mindy's apartment door. First, she had to go through the main door of the building, then up the stairs to the second floor to apartment 9, where Mindy lived. Tony knocked a few times. No answer. She even called Mindy's phone to see if she could hear it ringing inside, but she didn't hear anything. They were good friends, and Tony knew she was welcome anytime. So as she knocked again, this time she turned the doorknob, and it was unlocked, which was very unusual. She made her way inside, into the front hallway, and flipped on the light. Then she took about 2 or 3 steps inside, and she saw something at her feet. Now, in our minds, we try to make sense of everything we see. Our eyes take in stimuli, images, people, and our minds translate what we're seeing. When something doesn't add up, it may take a second for someone to realize what it is they're looking at. It would be unusual to see your friend lying on the ground, so at first, Tony wasn't sure what she was looking at. There was something on the floor. But then she realized it was Mindy. What was she doing there? So many thoughts were going through her mind as she tried to make sense of this. Was she sleeping? Was she playing a prank? Did she fall because of her disease? Because of MS? Mindy was just lying there, face up across the hallway, diagonally. But when Tony looked into Mindy's eyes, that's when her brain registered that this was something way worse. She saw something around her neck. She knew that her friend was in trouble and that she needed help. It just hit her, and Tony ran out of Mindy's apartment, screaming. She was distraught and terrified, being really loud. With all this yelling, she was getting the attention of other people in the building. She ran all the way out to the car, screaming, telling Danielle, "We have to get help. There's something around her neck." So, with all this commotion, other people in the building started to wonder what was going on. A guy appeared in the hallway, sticking his head out of one of the apartments, trying to figure out what in the world was happening. By that time, Danielle had made her way up to Mindy's apartment. She met the guy outside Mindy's door and said, "Please, can you go check on our friend? We think something happened to her." So they entered. Danielle went first. She did exactly what Tony had done. She wanted to see for herself, and she did. She took a few steps in, and that's all she needed. She saw what Tony saw, and it was obvious to her just how bad the situation was. As soon as she realized what she was looking at, she ran back out of that apartment as fast as she could. She ran so fast that she hit the wall in the hallway. The guy who was standing there went inside to check to see if Mindy was still alive. He bent down and tried to see if he could feel a pulse. He looked out into the hall and said, "I'm sorry, your friend is gone." The thing is, checking Mindy's pulse really wasn't necessary. Any ordinary person, even without any medical experience, would have been able to tell that Mindy was no longer alive by the extent of her injuries. But surprisingly, sometimes people who stumble upon a deceased person, even someone who has sustained very serious injuries, may not even notice the blood at first or just how bad the wounds are. I know this sounds unreal. How could Tony not have seen what was so obvious? But it's true. Our minds are so powerful that there was a case I recently became aware of when the Idaho murders happened. This is a short caveat, but it's relevant and interesting. A woman came out recently to defend the surviving roommates who supposedly either didn't hear the Idaho killings being carried out, specifically Dylan Mortensen. I think that's her name. She was the roommate who saw the shadowy figure in the house but didn't call the police. Well, there was a similar case that happened 3 decades ago out in Buffalo, New York. Alana Zobal was living in a 3-story home with her sorority sisters at the University of Buffalo one night in September. They were very excited, starting the new year out. They went to a party that night at a fraternity nearby. One of the girls from their group went home early before the others. When Alana came back, she was a little later and couldn't get into the house because the door was locked. So she decided to climb through a window. She lived there, no big deal. She did kind of notice there was a weird smell in the house, but she had been drinking and it was late. She just wanted to get to bed. She thought she heard some heavy breathing coming from her roommate's bedroom, but just figured it was her boyfriend having sex with her, so she ignored it. There was not one inclination for her to believe that her roommate was being murdered. The next morning, she discovered her roommate lying lifeless in her room. The thing is, she didn't see any blood. In her own words, she said, "I just saw liquid. My friend was taking her pulse, and I thought that my roommate choked on her own vomit right away. I said, 'Oh, it's vomit.' But then when the paramedics arrived, they stepped into the room, and I heard the word blood. And in a millisecond, when I looked in the room, the entire room was red." We have a defense mechanism that guards us from going into shock. It's to protect us so that we can run or fight to survive. If we see too much, we go into shock and either faint or freeze. So our minds create their own false reality. Helena defended Dylan in the Idaho case because we don't always recognize the signs. I don't know, has anything like that ever happened to you? Maybe not as extreme, but our minds blocking something out? Let me know. But back to Mindy and what was happening that September night in her apartment, the night her friends' lives and her life changed forever. It's a moment that's etched into their minds, a traumatic moment that would never die, along with Mindy. What happened to her? Who would want to hurt Mindy? The girls frantically called 911, hardly able to relay what was going on. Dispatch sent out Valley City Police Sergeant Dave Swenson to 515 8th Street, Apartment 9. They called him because he only lived a block away, so they figured he could run over, see what was going on, make sense of it, and then report back with details. Tony and Danielle were outside when he arrived. They were shocked, and that's an understatement. They were hysterical. However, they were able to point Sergeant Swenson to Mindy's apartment. He'd actually been out to this particular apartment building before. He went on calls all the time. This is a small town, so he went for noise disturbances, loud parties, music bothering neighbors, and also just spent time in the neighborhood. He recognized Mindy. He'd seen her before on other occasions, but not like this. She volunteered around town, and he was familiar with her. What horror movies are made of. The smell was what he noticed first. Pine sol, a cleaning solution. It has a very distinctive smell that's bold and long-lasting. As the name suggests, it smells like pine, but sort of mixed with ammonia or disinfectant. It's kind of like a freshly mopped floor smell. As Swenson made his way down the entry hallway into the apartment, there was a mat on the left with several pairs of shoes on it. And just past that, he saw Mindy lying across the floor. He saw her legs first and part of her midriff. She was fully clothed, wearing dark pants and a long-sleeved white top that had slid up, exposing her stomach. As he got closer, he saw she was lying on her back, face up, with her arms to her sides. Her head was in a very unnatural position. He could tell something was wrapped around her neck. Getting even closer, he realized it was a belt around her neck, and there was blood on it and on her face, pooling underneath her head. On the right, there were 2 knives, both bloody. One was still in her throat with the handle broken, and the other was lying right next to her head. This was bad. By this time, another officer was on the scene. Valley City PD officer Andrew Sather. Dispatch had sent him out there for a call regarding a strangling, probably because Tony had said, "I saw something around Mindy's neck." The officer met Sergeant Swenson inside. He saw Mindy's body, checked for a pulse, and of course made a record that she was deceased. He, too, made a comment about the smell of pine sol and noticed an empty bottle kind of tucked between Mindy's right arm and the side of her body, sort of in her armpit, with a cap nearby. When they removed the bottle, her keys were lying underneath. There was an inside-out coral and white striped shirt on top of her right arm, and her open wallet was right next to it. Her unzipped purse was still connected to her right arm, both straps wrapped securely around her forearm. It didn't look like anything was taken from her wallet. All of her cards were still snug inside the slots, with her cell phone nearby as well. That coral shirt seemed out of place, and she was fully dressed. So they scanned the room, and the officer started noticing that there was clothing scattered around the apartment. Otherwise, it was very tidy. As they followed this trail of clothing, they found a laundry basket right inside the door to Mindy's bedroom, along with another pile of clothing. Her flip-flops were off her feet, lying close by on top of a few more items of clothing. A preliminary observation of what had happened seemed to lead the officers to think someone ambushed Mindy as she was bringing her laundry basket full of clothing upstairs from the communal laundry room on site in the building of her apartment. The motive? They weren't sure, but it could have been sexual in nature because it appeared from where the laundry basket landed that the person who did this was trying to get her into her bedroom, which is why there was clothing scattered from the hall to that room. But it looks like she put up a fight and might have been attacked when she was trying to escape out the front door. Everything seemed to have happened in a very small portion of this already small apartment, between the front door, the small hallway, and her bedroom. The kitchen was located mere steps away from her head. It wouldn't have been difficult for someone to have grabbed those knives in an attempt to subdue her or make sure she was dead. But why would someone do this to Mindy? And who would do this to her? It was very disturbing for Swenson to see Mindy in this condition. She was so vibrant, and all of that bright and bubbly personality was gone. She was just a shell of who she once was. He was determined to find out who did this to her. She was so loved in this community. Sergeant Swenson knew the Valley City PD would not be able to handle this case on their own, so he immediately called his supervisor, who called the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. They sent out Special Agent Mark Saylor to the scene. He arrived not too long thereafter and looked over everything that Sergeant Swenson and Sather had seen. He determined that the person who did this had poured pine sol all over Mindy's head and body. He wasn't sure if this was just to desecrate the body or an attempt to remove evidence. What he did know was that he was going to need some of his own guys from the BCI to come and assist. So he called BCI partners, Agent Arn Rummel, a crime scene investigation specialist, and Agent Calvin Dupree, who was more of an interrogator, a in-your-face kind of guy that's great at gathering information, speaking to witnesses, and so on. Once the BCI agents arrived, they took a video as well as a number of pictures of this crime scene, while Sergeant Swenson went out and talked to neighbors to start gathering information outside. Within just 30 minutes, a number of people had come out of their apartments and were standing in front of the building, wondering what was going on. They saw officers putting up crime scene tape and were asking if anyone had seen anything out of the ordinary. Many of the residents were shaken up by what was going on. This apartment building became a crime scene out of nowhere. This is a tiny community that's definitely not used to anything like this. One resident, Christina Judd, was 7 months pregnant. She was clutching her 1-year-old daughter, Tiana, and was visibly upset over the entire situation. Chrissy and her husband, Mo Gibbs, lived a floor below Mindy. When they saw the flashing lights outside, they went out to see what was going on. Mo was actually a correctional officer for Valley City. He knew the officers and was informed by his colleagues that a murder had occurred in their building. This sent shockwaves through the entire building and the community. Chrissy was scared. She said, "I can't sleep here. I don't feel safe here. I gotta go." So, of course, right after Sergeant Swenson asked them a few questions, they left the apartment building. They went to Chrissy's parents' house, which was close by. She said she spent the night there, unable to sleep. She remembered her husband holding her all night long because she was terrified. She couldn't believe that this could happen in their apartment building. Tossing and turning all night, she was actually glad that she and her husband were in the middle of moving from this apartment to her parents' house, because she said she couldn't live there after this. "I think I would feel the same way," she reflected, especially if she thought where she lived was safe. "I would wonder, how in the world did this happen? I don't think I could sleep. I don't think I could eat. I would be so scared." She continued, "I don't know if anything like this has ever happened to you, but I like hearing those things in the comments. I haven't had anything like this happen, but even things like a break-in or other crimes that have happened in my area that I've lived in before made me scared to go back to my apartment at that time. And now this apartment was a full-blown crime scene." When Chrissy and Mo were asked if they noticed anything out of the ordinary that day, Sergeant Swenson was hoping that they had. He knew Mo. They played together on a softball team, and he worked at the jail, so he would be an excellent witness because he was used to working in the law enforcement environment. This was a close-knit community. Chrissy's dad, George Judd, worked as an athletic trainer for Valley City State University. Mindy was probably one of his students. Chrissy and Mo said that Chrissy was at work that day. They had lunch together with their little daughter, Tiana. Mo mentioned he smelled a very strong, distinct odor, like a cleansing disinfectant, in the afternoon. But other than that, he didn't hear or see anything. Chrissy's dad, George, had come over while Mo was watching Tiana and Chrissy was at work. He needed to get some information about Mo's wedding ring and to borrow Chrissy's car to drive to Fargo and pick up her mom from the airport. Later, when Chrissy got off work, they had a regular night. Then they saw the flashing lights. Swenson asked for Chrissy's father's information so they could follow up with him to see if he saw anything unusual when he came by that day. Then Swenson moved on to the next person in the crowd that he wanted to talk to. He saw a man standing with a woman. It was the guy who went into Mindy's apartment with Danielle and took her pulse. The man told Swenson his name was Robert Lynn. He wasn't a resident, but the woman he was with, Shelley Rose, was. She lived in one of the bottom apartments in the building and was the mother of Robert's daughter, Megan, who was just a child at the time. He was there visiting that day. He said he heard someone screaming, so he looked out the door and realized it was coming from upstairs. He too mentioned that he smelled pine sol and that he saw the empty bottle underneath Mindy's arm. He remembered that overwhelming scent from earlier in the afternoon. He said he had only been inside Mindy's apartment a very short time before Swenson showed up, just enough time for him to touch her arm and discover that she did not have a pulse. However, he did tell Swenson, Oh, I didn't touch her with my fingers. I used the back of my hand so that I wouldn't leave any fingerprints behind. He said he really didn't have to, because anyone could see that she was dead. Not many people would be concerned with leaving fingerprints behind in a time like this, so that definitely stood out. It was a very intense moment. If you're truly trying to help someone, you don't usually have time to think about anything else, but Robert had. So it was something that Swenson took note of. Then he asked Shelley if she had heard or seen anything or smelled anything unusual that day. Shelley said it was a normal day. Her adult daughter, Nicole, came by twice, once in the morning after her shift, which was over at 7:30 a.m., and then later in the day around lunchtime, a little after 1. She did say she smelled pine sol around that time. She remembered that she went out to smoke a cigarette with Nicole, and as they walked out of the building, they could smell pine sol in the hallway. Swenson asked for her daughter's name. She said it was Nicole Thorson, and provided him with her contact information so that he could reach out to her as well. Shelley mentioned that Robert came over after he got off work around 5:30 p.m. Later, when they heard the screams, he went upstairs alone without her to see what was going on. However, she started coming up the stairs with her young daughter. She told Swenson that she stopped as she got near the hallway to Mindy's apartment because she could feel that something was wrong. She didn't want her daughter to see anything. But what she said next was even scarier. She revealed that a week earlier, someone had tried to push in her door, but she never reported it to the police. Now, knowing what had happened, it was terrifying to her, and she wondered if it was connected. While Swenson was talking to residents, officers had informed the New Salem Police Department about Mindy's death. A deputy who knew the family really well for the last couple of decades said that he would deliver the devastating news to her family. It was around 11 p.m. by the time he showed up at Rebecca and Jason's door that night. Rebecca could tell just by the look on his face that this was not going to be good news. But she never expected it to be as bad as it was. When the couple came to the door, the officer just said, "I'm sorry to inform you, Rebecca, but Mindy's dead." Rebecca fell to the floor after hearing the news, and the deputy didn't have much else to tell them except that Mindy died under suspicious circumstances. It just seemed unreal. Not Mindy. Why Mindy? Who would want to hurt someone like her? That's all Rebecca could think about. Someone so loving and kind, it just didn't make sense. The couple had the deputy go with them over to the family farm so that they could give her parents the news. Rebecca rang the doorbell and she heard her father say, "Who's there?" He could see that Rebecca was visibly upset. She said, "It's me, Dad. I've got some bad news." She looked at her mom and said, "Mindy's dead." Eunice described getting the news as being stabbed right in the heart. She didn't want this to be real. She just kept wanting to believe that this did not happen. She loved Mindy so very much. She didn't understand how anything bad could have happened to someone like her. She ran into Mindy's bedroom screaming, picked up a sweater that her daughter had left there, and just wanted to take in Mindy's scent. She held Mindy's sweater there and broke down, tears streaming down her face. All of these thoughts were coming back to her, all the memories she shared with her daughter, who was now gone. At this point, they didn't know that she had been murdered. Remember, the New Salem deputy had said that he had limited information about what was going on. They just said that she died under suspicious circumstances. Her family wondered, what did that mean? They wanted to know what happened. They needed answers. But right now they had to reach out to all of Mindy's friends and let them know the terrible news. One of those friends was Mindy's childhood best friend, Ashley Wallace. Ashley got the call that night. It was really late and she just kept repeating the same thing. No, no, no. They grew up together. They went to college together. They were birds of a feather. She drove right over to Mindy's apartment, and what she saw would stick with her for the rest of her life. This moment would be etched into her mind. When she pulled up, she could see one of Mindy's windows was open, the wind blowing the curtains and the light was on. It was as if Mindy was there. But she knew she was gone. She just wanted to go up there and help her. She kept thinking, Is someone up there with her? Is someone helping her? She knew it was too late for that, but she just kept thinking about her friend lying there by herself. There was no way for her to touch her, to hold her, to be there for her. It was too much for her to take in. She felt helpless in that moment. By that time, in the middle of the night, many people had gathered over the last few hours. Friends from work, from school. They wanted answers. The team of investigators was there all night long, into the early morning hours of the next day, just scouring Mindy's entire apartment for clues. First, let's start outside this building. There's a main door to the building. It's not secured with a lock of any kind, and it's shared by all the tenants and the guests and everyone coming in and out. As you step inside, there's a stairway that goes up and down, one to the basement-style apartments below, and one up to the other levels. Mindy lived on the second floor in apartment 9. In this picture, you can see right inside the front door. As you come in, you're facing the opposite way. Now, here's the view from the door coming into Mindy's apartment. You see a picture frame on the right hallway wall, a TV up ahead on an entertainment center, and this opening is where her bedroom is. Let's go back to the first photo. There's gray carpet, and you can see the mat with shoes on it. This is a very short hallway, just a few feet until you reach the door to Mindy's bedroom, which is on the right. The door was open, and you can see inside, there's her bed. There were also several handwritten notes taped to different walls, which we will get to in just a moment. If you continue straight, you enter her small living room. There's a TV, an entertainment center, and you can see she loved pictures. She had many of her friends and family members all over the place. There's also an air conditioner above this area and a DVD player below. She even had a little air freshener. To the left is a sitting area with a couch, more pictures of her and her friends, a remote for the TV, and a phone tucked away on the side table. To the left of that is the open kitchen, right off the living room area. There's a small table here with a bunch of pictures laid out, as though she or someone was going through them. There's also a portable CD player, a CD, and maybe some contact solution. There's a card and some film negatives you get when you develop pictures, along with everyday items. Looking back at the picture zoomed out, there's a view of the linoleum flooring and the kitchen counter. Upon closer inspection, I noticed some prescription bottles, a pair of blue kitchen cleaning gloves, and some bread. Just normal stuff. Here's a better view of the kitchen counter and sink area, including the knife block where Mindy stored all of her sharper knives. Again, it's a pretty standard kitchen. On the opposite side, there's a green refrigerator. Those are vintage now for sure. I haven't seen one of those in a long time in person. On top of it, there are more pictures, a calendar on the wall, and another air freshener. As you can see, Mindy was very tidy and organized. That's why, when I show you the clothing strewn around the room, you'll be able to tell it's out of place. Now that you kind of get a feel for the apartment layout, I want to show you where Mindy was. She was lying across the hall, where the hall opens to the living room and where you would move toward her bedroom door. Her feet were facing her door, with her head toward the kitchen area. Part of her hair was half on the carpet and half on the kitchen linoleum. You'd see her legs first as you came inside. She was wearing a coral shirt, black pants, and white flip-flops on top of a pile of clothing. That bag you see there is a crime scene text bag. It didn't belong to Mindy, so you can ignore it. Here's the coral shirt up close. It's on top of her white purse. You can also see her open wallet here. Now in this picture, I'll show you the whole scene, but first, I'm going to zoom in. You can see there's an outline of a bottle between her arm and her side. I know it's blurred. That's just the way I got these photos, but I'm outlining where the bottle is. Here, I'll put one on top to show how they found the one next to her with the cap nearby. Here's a close-up of her wallet, and I'm showing how nothing seems to be removed. You can see her unzipped purse with the strap still around her arm, as well as the string of her lanyard still around her arm, which held her keys. You can see the keys underneath. Okay, now I'm blurring out the top of her head. You can see it's half on the living room floor and half on the linoleum of the kitchen floor. Above it, there are a few items of clothing. Back towards her feet again and toward the hall near her bedroom, you can see more items of clothing going into that hallway. They continued through the doorway to her room. This is from the inside of her room looking back out. You can see tiny piles now coming into her bedroom. A bigger pile of loose clothing is visible along with a laundry basket and clothes hanging out of it. Close up, you see a picture frame not attached to the wall, just leaning against it, with more pictures of her friends and family. I even recognize her ex-boyfriend Kyle, as well as her hairdryer and a fan on the floor. Here's her bedroom dresser. It looks like most of ours did when we were growing up. There's a boombox in Mindy's apartment that brings back a lot of memories, stereo for the younger viewers. On it, there's a lint roller, Victoria's Secret lotion bottles, little jewelry boxes, CDs, and more pictures. Then there's this item, which I couldn't quite identify at first. I finally guessed it was a hairdryer diffuser cover because I have curly hair, and so did Mindy. It looks similar to a hot sock or a collapsible diffuser. What do you think? The notes scattered throughout her apartment clearly show that she was a believer in Jesus Christ. These details were taken into account by the officers investigating her case as they built a profile of her as a victim. They needed to know about her life, what she did for work, who she spent time with, and her belief system. This information helps investigators understand who would want to hurt her. If something contradicts their understanding of her character, like evidence suggesting drug use when she was known to lead a clean lifestyle, it raises questions. A person's lifestyle is crucial for piecing together what happened in their final moments. In Mindy's apartment, the notes reveal a lot about her. There were numerous handwritten reminders on her walls, doors, and mirrors about her faith. For those listening rather than watching, some of these notes included affirmations like, "Jesus lives in my heart. I, Mindy, am a child of God. I belong to the Lord today, tomorrow, and forever. Jesus Christ loves me, died for me, and forgives me. And Mindy, you are covered by the blood of Jesus Christ and forgiven by Him. Praise be to God." Other notes expressed gratitude for Jesus and prayers for others, as well as reminders for positive changes in her life as a Christian. Reading these gives me insight into who Mindy was and illustrates how desperately she clung to her faith during a challenging time. Remember, she was living in this apartment to undergo chemotherapy infusions for a clinical trial. That's incredibly scary, with no guarantees and high stakes. It saddens me to think about what happened to her. It didn't seem like anyone ransacked her apartment or attempted to steal anything. I mentioned that several pictures were missing from the frames in Mindy's apartment, which investigators found odd. For instance, look at this frame in the living room, right near Mindy's body. At least 4 photos of her were removed. The same goes for the wall unit. More pictures are missing from that frame as well. This detail stood out to investigators because, in many cases, perpetrators often keep items belonging to their victims, and pictures could certainly be among those. It's possible someone was obsessed with Mindy. The crime felt personal. A belt was wrapped around her neck, indicating that the perpetrator had to be close to her. The nature of the attack was intimate. She was stabbed, which is a sign of anger or rage. Crime scene investigators discovered 2 knives, one of which was pulled from her neck, with the blade completely broken off and hanging from the handle. Both knives matched those in Mindy's kitchen, just steps away from where she lay. This overkill suggested that the attacker was incredibly enraged. There were no signs of forced entry, implying that Mindy may have known her assailant or felt comfortable enough to let them into her apartment. Then Agent Rummel noticed something significant underneath Mindy's left fingernails. A reddish substance, possibly tissue or skin. Did she scratch her assailant? Additionally, there were hairs found between Mindy's clenched fingers. To preserve evidence, her hands and feet were bagged. This is a standard procedure. The bags are secured with tape on the wrists and ankles to prevent any loss during transportation to the medical examiner's office. They also collected carpet clippings with suspected blood stains, as well as swabbing drops of blood found on Mindy's shirt. After hours of work, Mindy was sent for an autopsy, while investigators sought to interview more people to establish a timeline of her last movements, who she was, and what she was doing before her death. At this point, they still had no idea when the murder occurred or her cause of death. They needed to turn to Mindy's life for clues, understanding her routines, the people she associated with, and anyone who might have had a motive to harm her. They started by speaking with her parents. Eunice, her mother, said that she talked to Mindy about everything. They couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt their beloved daughter. Eunice remembered speaking with Mindy the night before. They had a wonderful conversation. Eunice was supposed to visit Mindy that day, but at the last minute, she decided against it, feeling guilty for not being there when Mindy needed her most. During their last call, Mindy reassured her mother that it was okay not to come out, understanding Eunice was tired and had a lot on her plate. Her parents recalled the last time they saw her, not long before her death. Mindy had visited the family to help on the farm, loading bales of hay with her father. Typically, she would drive off and wave goodbye, but this time she paused, backed up, and ran to hug her dad, telling him, "I love you." He found this unusual and felt it was a significant moment, as if something was about to happen, though they didn't know what. Eunice shared that Mindy had plans for a modeling shoot the day she died. She didn't know many details, but Mindy had called her sister April for advice on what to wear. April mentioned that Mindy found the job online and checked it with the Better Business Bureau. Despite this, April had warned Mindy to be cautious, which shed light on the missing pictures from the frames. Mindy had likely removed them to choose examples of different looks for the shoot. James Robinson, who was not well regarded by Mindy's family. Eunice mentioned that Mindy didn't like him because he often took his frustrations out on Tony, Mindy's friend. The situation was so concerning that Mindy confided in her mother about her worries for Tony, particularly because James was involved with drugs and she wanted Tony to stop seeing him. James knew that Mindy wasn't a fan of his, which might have fueled any resentment he had against her. It's possible he suspected she was covering for Tony that night, leading him to check if Mindy was with the girls. If he was on drugs, it wouldn't be far-fetched for him to fly into a rage if he felt betrayed. The nature of the crime seemed personal. To strangle someone or use knives requires an up-close interaction. The knives found at the scene came from Mindy's own apartment, suggesting the killer might have acted impulsively in the heat of the moment. For these reasons, investigators decided to put James Robinson on their list of individuals to interview. They had already spoken with Mindy's sister, April, and reached out to her brother, Michael, who had just returned from duty in Iraq. Michael was distraught over his sister's death, lamenting that he had survived the war, but she couldn't even make it out of Valley City alive. He didn't have any new information but described Mindy as someone who dove into life fearlessly. She would jump into a pool without checking for water. The shock of her loss was overwhelming for him. Meanwhile, investigators were interviewing everyone in Mindy's building, as well as neighbors in nearby apartments and her close friends. That morning, Mindy had made plans to meet with her friend Jennifer Peters and her daughter. Jennifer intended to go to lunch with her husband and 3 kids before meeting Mindy around 1 p.m. After finishing her meal, Jennifer called Mindy at approximately 12:46 p.m., but the call went straight to voicemail. Mindy never returned that call or any others. Lacey, another close friend who had known Mindy since preschool, reported seeing her at the university library at 11:30 a.m. She noted that Mindy left around 12:20 p.m. Investigators confirmed that Mindy logged off the library computer at 12:23 p.m., and since it only took about 5 minutes to return to her apartment, they estimated she would have arrived by 12:30 p.m. Statements from Tony and Danielle revealed that they had been trying to contact Mindy throughout the day without success, which was unusual for her. She also missed a dinner with friends that evening, indicating something was amiss. Mindy's cell phone records showed that her first missed call was at 12:47 p.m., leading investigators to estimate that the attack occurred around that time. It suggested that something had happened that prevented her from answering her phone, despite her plans for the day. Investigators reached out to Nicole, the daughter of resident Shelley Rose, who had been at the building around that time. She mentioned seeing an unfamiliar man in a flannel shirt entering the building just before 1 p.m. A few minutes later, she and her mother went outside for a cigarette break, during which she noticed a strong smell of pine sol in the hallway. They also spoke with George Judd, the father of resident Christy Gibbs. He was at his daughter's apartment around 3:30 p.m. on the 13th, on his way to Fargo to pick up his wife, Sue. George reported nothing out of the ordinary during his visit. He had been sitting on the couch with his stepdaughter, Tiana, and didn't smell any pine sol at that time. Based on this information, investigators believed that Mindy was killed between 12:30 and 1 p.m. EM. This narrow time frame meant that Mindy had been dead for approximately 9 hours by the time Tony discovered her body. The autopsy results, conducted by Dr. George Mizell, indicated that the cause of Mindy's death was incised wounds to her neck and asphyxia. There were no signs of sexual assault, but tissue clippings and scrapings from her fingernails confirmed the presence of human tissue, which was sent to a lab for DNA analysis. Meanwhile, at least a dozen CBI agents were interviewing family, friends, co-workers, anyone who knew Mindy. Ashley Wallace recounted a conversation from a few weeks prior during which Mindy had called her in a panic, saying, "What is going on? Someone's trying to take me." Mindy explained that she had been standing outside her apartment when a man in a blue car rolled down his window and asked her for directions to a nearby street. After the man in the blue car chased Mindy, she sprinted back into her building, terrified. She informed her mother, who advised her to call the police if she felt threatened. News of the incident spread quickly, reaching Rebecca and her husband, Jason. Mindy did call the police to file a report, describing the man as a heavy-set white male in his 60s, approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall, driving a blue car that resembled a Ford Taurus. Detectives made a note to look for any vehicles matching that description. Investigators then turned their attention to Mindy's co-workers. She worked as a waitress at a local restaurant where an older man living in a motorhome across the street frequently came in and insisted on being seated at her table. He annoyed Mindy and her colleagues, prompting her to complain about how uneasy he made her feel. They decided to bring him in for questioning. His name was Ralph Albert Walters, and he was added to the list of potential suspects. All residents of Mindy's apartment building were ordered to provide DNA samples for the investigation. One by one, they came down to the station, either voluntarily or when called by an agent. The first person on their list was Robert Lynn, the man who had checked Mindy's pulse with the back of his hand. When he arrived for questioning, he anticipated being scrutinized more than others. He had indeed been present at the scene when Swenson arrived, and while he claimed to be assisting, investigators wondered if he was setting up a reason for his DNA to be found there. Robert stood out in the small town with his shaved head, tattoos, and distinct style, making him a target for suspicion. He had moved to Valley City only a few months before Mindy's murder, originally from California. When asked if he knew Mindy, he stated he recognized her in passing and described her as a pretty girl living in the apartment building. He claimed to have felt her positive spirit the night of the incident. Robert recounted that he was watching television in his apartment when he heard commotion outside. When questioned about his interaction with Mindy, he admitted he had a criminal record from California and acknowledged it honestly. Investigators verified his past, which included charges for stealing a car and possession of a gun and marijuana, resulting in a 2.5-year prison sentence. He insisted he had changed, having moved to be closer to his daughter. With the narrow time frame of 12:30 to 1 p.m. established for the murder, detectives inquired about his whereabouts that day. Robert claimed nothing out of the ordinary occurred, stating he worked his usual schedule and returned to the apartment building at 5:30 p.m. However, he mentioned a lunch break at noon, roughly the same time they believed Mindy was killed. While talking to the detectives, they noticed cuts along his arms and inquired about them. Robert attributed them to his job in construction, where he worked with steel. Yet, a specific finger had a bandage on it, prompting further questions. When asked about the bandage, he claimed it was from a cut he sustained on September 13th while handling steel. While talking to the detectives, they noticed cuts along his arms and inquired about them. Uncertainty hung in the air as detectives asked Robert if he would provide a DNA sample through a cheek swab. He agreed, assuring them he was willing to cooperate in any way, whether it be fingerprints or swabs. They collected his DNA and released him, as there was nothing to hold him on at that moment. Now, they had to wait for the results while confirming his alibi through his employer, who verified that Robert was indeed occupied with work during the critical time frame. Next, they brought in Tony's boyfriend, James, the one Mindy had issues with. When questioned about his connection to Mindy, James explained that he knew her from spending time at her family's restaurant with Tony. He described casual hangouts, emphasizing that he was only around occasionally. When asked about his criminal record, James was upfront, admitting past troubles with illegal drugs, but insisted he was trying to stay on the right path now. Detectives noticed a fresh, gnarly cut on his right hand, prompting questions about how he got it. James casually explained that he had cut himself while going through a window, but detectives couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. He claimed he had about 4 hours left of community service from his previous charges, which he was completing that day before visiting a friend and returning home around 5:30 p.m. They verified his alibi and, like Robert, James consented to provide a DNA sample. With both men's samples sent for analysis, it was another waiting game. Meanwhile, detectives were keen on tracking down Ralph Walters, the man living in a motorhome who often visited Mindy's workplace. When they called him in, Ralph portrayed himself as a drifter with no ties to the area, a characterization that set off red flags. He mentioned that on the day of the murder, he had changed the oil in his motorhome, but didn't have a solid alibi. The detectives observed a cut on one of his hands similar to those on James and Robert. When asked about it, Ralph explained that he sustained the injury while changing the oil. The coincidence of these cuts was intriguing. James had one from a broken window, Robert from his construction job, and Ralph from an oil filter. While not entirely unusual, the pattern raised eyebrows. When pressed about his interactions at the restaurant, Ralph insisted he had never harassed anyone and claimed not to know who Mindy was. This contradicted her coworkers, who had seen him frequently in the restaurant. After providing his DNA sample, he too remained on the list of suspects until the results came back. With every individual of interest interviewed, detectives turned their attention to those closest to Mindy, starting with her current boyfriend, Jordan Raynham. This inquiry unfolded within the first 48 hours after Mindy's discovery. Jordan, hailing from a local farming family, had been in a relationship with Mindy for over a year. He was known to be soft-spoken, clean-cut, and church-going, a profile that generally raised no alarms. Friends and family praised him, and he often enjoyed taking Mindy for rides in his shiny new Corvette, introducing her to his family. Despite the favorable opinions, Jason had his suspicions. While everyone else dismissed the idea that Jordan could be involved, Jason couldn't shake off the feeling that he was possessive of Mindy. This lingering doubt hinted at a more complex web of relationships and emotions surrounding the case. There were moments when Mindy tried to cherish time with her family on their farm, yet Jordan would show up unannounced, clearly upset that she wasn't with him. On one occasion, she had to firmly tell him, "Please leave me alone." This pattern of possessiveness raised some eyebrows as detectives brought Jordan in for questioning. They needed him to recount the events of the night before and the day Mindy was murdered. Jordan explained that they had gone to a local stop-and-go store to grab drinks and then rented a movie, a nostalgic nod to simpler times, reminiscent of Blockbuster. After that, he left her place. The next morning, Mindy called him precisely at 10:45 a.m. However, that single call was unusual. She typically reached out about 10 times throughout the day. Jordan claimed he worked on his family farm all day and didn't hear from her again. When investigators asked if he would consent to a DNA sample and a polygraph test, Jordan appeared distraught throughout the interview. Tears streamed down his face as he struggled to maintain his composure, especially during the polygraph, where questions like, "Did you harm Mindy and cause her death?" intensified his emotional turmoil. The results of the polygraph were inconclusive. He expressed, "This is just too stressful for me," but was it merely the stress, or did guilt lurk beneath the surface? At the end of his questioning, he insisted that he loved Mindy, providing a DNA sample as the investigation continued. While this was just a fraction of the extensive interviews conducted, it was a crucial piece in a daunting puzzle, and investigators still had no solid leads. However, on day 3, a significant break emerged. While analyzing Mindy's phone, detectives discovered a series of disturbing voice messages. Some were left after her murder. The messages were not isolated incidents. They revealed a pattern from a man's voice, which raised alarm bells. One message captured their attention. "You know my number, sweetie. I miss you. I love you. You're my inspiration. Please help me, Mindy." The voice was shaky, and as he pleaded, "I can't continue without you. Please help me in some way. Help me." It became clear that this individual had a strange obsession. Investigators traced the calls to a man named Rodney Kuznia. The last name rang a bell. Mindy's family and friends had mentioned her ex-boyfriend, Kyle Kuznia, the homecoming king who had broken her heart 2 years prior. What made this discovery even more shocking was that Rodney was Kyle's father. Their exchanges had been frequent and mutual, leading detectives to wonder why an ex-boyfriend's father would communicate with Mindy in such a personal manner. Rodney quickly became the prime suspect. It's not uncommon for perpetrators to reach out to victims posthumously, attempting to construct alibis or feign ignorance of their death. Jodi Arias is a notorious example of this behavior, known for her post-mortem messages. Another unsettling message from Rodney revealed, "Mindy, this is Rod. I know what happened to you. I just love hearing your voice," as he sobbed. "I can't take it. I love you, kid. God picked a beautiful flower. I'm sorry this happened the way it happened to you." His obsession was evident, and detectives sensed that he wanted more than just a friendship with Mindy. With this new information, detectives decided to bring in Kyle for questioning, as he was the initial link between Mindy and Rodney. Mindy had previously dated Kyle, and friends noted that she still had feelings for him, even though he had opted to end the relationship. Now Kyle was planning to marry someone else, seemingly moving on. This raised questions. Did he still harbor feelings for Mindy? And could he have had any motive for being involved in her tragic fate? They didn't know, but they had to rule him out just like everyone else. Kyle explained what we already know about how they met and everything in their relationship. However, he did mention the relationship was rocky, which was one thing that they were quite surprised about, considering all the good things that they heard from everyone else. He described the relationship as really tough on him. It was hard. They were always arguing, and it got worse. After Kyle graduated, he moved an hour away, like I had said. Mindy was paranoid. She thought that Kyle was going to find another girl, even though he kept reassuring her, "I'm not. I'm with you. That's not going to happen." But after a while, the long distance just wasn't working for them. Ever since the breakup, he hasn't been in contact with her. However, about 7 months ago, Mindy showed up at his apartment unannounced, and Kyle admitted he wasn't happy about it. He was dating someone else by then, and he didn't have anything to say to Mindy. So when she showed up, he let her know that he told her to leave. Mindy stood there in tears, but Kyle didn't back down. Now he's telling the investigators he wished he would have handled that situation differently, and he hadn't spoken to her since. The investigators checked into Kyle's alibi, and it's true. He was out of town for work on the day of Mindy's murder, so he was not involved. Now they want to focus their questions on what he knows about Mindy and his father. What kind of relationship did they have? Kyle immediately lets them know he was not okay with his dad keeping in touch with Mindy. He actually told him he didn't want him talking to her. Kyle figured it was better to get them to stop now before they formed an even closer bond. He had a woman in his life he was planning to marry. So he kept thinking, let's say 10, 20 years down the line, if they're still talking, that's going to be weird. Kyle had moved on, and he felt it was inappropriate for his father to maintain this relationship with his ex. He also added he knew that she was getting information about him from his dad. This was a situation where Rodney would call Mindy multiple times a day, even come visit her. Kyle felt like his dad had a very unhealthy attachment to her. He asked his dad, "What is it going to take for you to stop talking to her?" And by the way, Kyle's mom and dad are still married. So this is a married man in contact with the ex-girlfriend of his son. It's strange. Kyle's mom does find out about these calls and she's very upset. She confronts Rodney and she says, "You know, that's wrong. You're married and you're talking to this younger gal." And Kyle agreed. So at this point, they let Kyle go and they start to question Mindy's friends about Rodney. They told the investigators that Mindy saw Rodney as a father figure. It was not romantic in her eyes. It was a way for her to keep tabs on Kyle, the person that she really wanted to be with. However, as time went on, she got into this new relationship with Jordan, and Mindy had mentioned that she kind of wished that Rodney would stop calling. One reason was because it made Jordan feel uncomfortable. It was inappropriate, but Mindy was too nice to say anything. But now investigators are wondering, did Mindy finally have the courage to tell him to stop? Maybe it made him angry enough to do something drastic. They finally bring Rodney in and confront him about everything that they've uncovered. The investigators start questioning him right away about what his relationship with Mindy was like. They said, "We don't quite understand it, Rodney." And he said, "Well, you have to know Mindy to understand it because she was quite the bubbly character." And then he said this, "Mindy reminded me so much of my wife and her younger days." Okay, is that strange? I couldn't really tell. It's like if she reminds him of his wife, then that does seem like that's romantic in nature. He explains that it started out that they would just keep in touch once in a while, like once, maybe twice a week. But it was really hard to catch her. She was a really busy person. So, he would leave her a message, and then it was kind of like back and forth at first. They would chit-chat, mostly about Kyle, asking things like, whether she still had a chance with him, what he was doing. Like her friends mentioned keeping tabs. But from this, they developed a friendship, and they began talking about a lot of other things. They even talked after Rodney's wife found out, except in his version, his wife didn't care at all. He said, "Oh, it's nothing serious. I just told my wife it's a friend and I really needed a friend." So he said, "Are you really going to take my friend away from me?" It's very interesting. According to Rodney, even Kyle understood his relationship with Mindy because he said, Kyle asked him, "Are you still talking to Mindy?" And he told him, "Yes." And he said Kyle's response was, "Well, if it was that important to you, then I guess it's fine." But that's not what Kyle told investigators. Rodney does admit at one point that Mindy kind of questioned whether they should end their little chit-chats. But Rodney couldn't let go. He says besides, he straight up asked her, "Should I just stop calling you?" And she said, No, don't do that." He says if she would have told him to stop, he would have had to let her go. But then out of nowhere, Rodney was like, "I'm telling you guys, a lot of things here probably shouldn't have. My wife might divorce me over it." Like what? Well, of course, investigators were curious too. So they said, "Tell us what you mean, Rodney." And he's like, "Well, I was meeting with Mindy. They would go out for meals together. And he was even giving her money. He had just seen her before the murder, and he said he gave her $100 because she was supposed to be flying down to her brother's wedding in Washington, and she was short on cash." Rodney let the investigators know that at first, Mindy didn't want to accept the money, but Rodney insisted, saying that he tried to scare her by saying, "If you don't take it, I'm going to go spend it on booze at the bar." And Mindy didn't want that for Rodney, so she took it, and she thought it was a 20. But then when she opened it up and noticed it was a $100 bill, she's like, No, you cannot give me this." He's like, "That's your money. I'm just trying to help you out." He told her she was like a little daughter to him, and he'd help his daughter in the same way. Well, after hearing this, investigators are actually even more suspicious of Rodney. He's keeping secrets from his wife, he's making special trips, he's giving Mindy money, not to mention the odd messages. So they ask him about those messages he left for Mindy. He admits he found out she was murdered, and he called. He left those messages, and he knows it's stupid, but he really just wanted her to pick up again. So they asked, "What did you tell her?" He repeats the same messages we heard. that God picked a perfect flower. All that he said was, "I just wanted to hear her voice again." And now for his alibi. He tells them he was working on his farm from early morning to the evening, and that he left after his wife went to work, which is around 7:30 a.m. He drove 2 miles out to his farm and met his son, Kirk. He gave them a minute-by-minute account of his day, and they'd have to check it all out. He also agreed to a DNA sample, and they let him go for now. Yes, the messages were strange, but when I heard them I did start to think they kind of sounded like someone who was grieving and wanted to hear her voice. And she did have one of those voice recordings where it actually said, "Hey, it's Mindy." It wasn't a pre-recorded bot saying leave a message for blah blah blah. So maybe it is strange, but not as strange as we thought. I wasn't sure. It was definitely odd to have an ex-boyfriend's dad keeping in touch, that's for sure. But did he kill her? Well, he's a person of interest for sure, until they checked his alibi and realized he was 200 miles away, eating with his family at the time that Mindy was murdered. The community is on edge. Women are afraid in their own homes. No one wants to go out. They're afraid someone will follow them back to their place, and it'll be a repeat of what happened to Mindy. So many women in the small community were fearful. They thought they would be next, especially Mindy's friends. They no longer felt safe in their community. Ashley said she couldn't even take a shower or be alone or do the simplest task anymore because she thought that someone would be waiting for her right behind that shower curtain. Not just Mindy's friends were afraid. Residents of the apartment were afraid. They wanted answers. Some of them didn't even want to live there anymore. The Valley City PD held a press conference, and they told the community to be careful, to be aware of their surroundings, that they were still looking for the person who did this. The last homicide in that city was in 2003. It was a triple homicide of Sharon Hatcher. She was 42 years old, along with her 16-year-old daughter, April, and her 21-year-old friend, Michael Barnett. All three of them were shot to death. Another man in the neighborhood was shot but survived the ordeal. The person responsible was Daniel Jansen. He was a former Valley City bar owner and Sharon's ex-boyfriend, who apparently had jealousy issues. He said he snapped one night when he was doing drugs and went over there and went crazy. Wow. And now there's Mindy. The detectives followed up on more than 200 leads, and dozens of people came forward and were interviewed, but they had no suspects. Mindy's parents felt suspended in time. They felt like the world didn't exist. The only thing they could think about was Mindy. Nothing else mattered. They wanted answers, and waiting was so hard. They wanted to know details about her case. But I'm sure, police have to keep these things quiet. The parents weren't given much information, but the news came in from the crime lab that they were able to create a DNA profile from the tissue underneath Mindy's fingernails. Now they could compare it to all of those DNA samples that they were collecting and then run it through CODIS to see if they got any hits. 6 days after the murder, at 2 p.m. on Tuesday, September 19th, Mindy's family held her funeral in the hometown of New Salem, in the high school gym where she used to wear the number 24 jersey playing basketball. They chose this location due to the number of people who said they wanted to attend. They had 1,000 people or more at this service. They knew that was not going to be feasible at the church. Their service was led by Mindy's brother-in-law, Jason, who was a pastor. He had the right words to say, and he knew Mindy so well. A basketball was placed in the hoop above the pastor's head, and they knotted the strings at the end so that the ball would stay in place as a symbol of the sport that Mindy loved so much. Everyone was crying. It was hard on all of her loved ones. The police were actually there undercover. They were on scene, scoping out all of the guests in there to protect the family because they didn't know who was targeted. So as people were there to pay their respects, there was a sense of fear over them. They were afraid of what could happen to Mindy's family. Mindy's father was paranoid, and he said he would be until they caught who did this. Mindy was laid to rest in Graceland Cemetery in New Salem. Many people who loved Mindy came forward to speak about her and the memories they had. Doug Peters, the athletic director for the university, said that he and Mindy became very good friends shortly after he came to the university in 2004. As the director, she was always so bubbly. She didn't just walk into a room, she bounced into a room. She was close to his family and loved his daughters. He said she was one of the nicest people he had ever met. She really loved kids, and she's someone that he hopes his daughter will be like one day. Mindy's boyfriend, Jordan, spoke as well. He said, "I don't think anyone could have met her and said hello to her and forgotten her. And I hope that they didn't, because if they did, they missed out on someone special." There's a heart-shaped garden that was created in Mindy's memory out in Valley City. It's a place where her loved ones can come to remember her. A day after the funeral, on September 20th, investigators got their biggest lead yet, a DNA match to what they retrieved from Mindy's fingernails. But it's from an unsolved case from Fargo, North Dakota, dating back 2 years to 2004. A semen sample was taken from a woman who claimed that a man had forced himself on her against her will. At the time, they couldn't find a match, and she described the man who hurt her as a black male, muscular, over 6 feet tall, and over 200 pounds, probably in his late 20s or maybe early 30s. Well, the investigators on Mindy's case wanted to go talk to this woman, so they drove out to Fargo, and she agreed to meet with them. She was out celebrating with a few of her friends. They went to a concert and a fair, and then they went out to a bar to drink. The last thing she remembered was getting some water and telling her friend she would be right back because she was going to the restroom, but she didn't come back. She had been drugged. She woke up with a strange man on top of her in a place she had never been. She was actually pinned down on her stomach, and he was behind her with his hand over her mouth so she couldn't scream. She tried to fight, but he was twice her size and very strong. She actually thought that she was going to die that night, but he did let her go. He told her there was a cab waiting outside. She didn't even have shoes on. She was terrified. She was worried that he was going to chase her down and kill her. So she screamed while she ran down that hallway until someone let her inside one of the rooms. I think it was a hotel that she was at. She fell down in front of them, just screaming and crying for them to call 911. She was taken to a nearby hospital where they did a vaginal swab. She had bruises all over her thighs and other parts of her body. The nurse examiner said this was the worst case of its kind that she had ever seen. The victim said he was going to kill her. They were able to get a sample of this DNA, but it never matched anyone, until now. This poor girl had lost hope over the last couple of years. She was destroyed. She couldn't go out in public without feeling terrified of what would happen. It was devastating. She was finally starting to heal. She graduated from college and became a teacher, and now she had just gotten this call that the DNA in her case matched the one in Mindy's murder. That was shocking. But not as shocking as this next piece of information they had been given. All of their prime suspects were ruled out. Kyle's dad, the guy from the mobile home, the neighbor who checked her pulse with the back of his hand, and everyone else on their list that had given DNA samples. But now they had a description. They were still waiting and still collecting DNA samples, but now they could concentrate their efforts on anyone with the specific attributes of the person who hurt the victim in Fargo. Tall, dark, muscular. Well, there weren't that many people that Mindy spent time with that matched that description. But there was someone in the building who did on the basement level. He had already spoken to investigators and willingly came down to the station to give them a sample of his DNA. He was also someone they knew. Remember Mo Gibbs, the 34-year-old correctional officer and husband of that pregnant woman, Chrissy? They didn't have a reason to believe they needed to look into him any further. They already knew a lot about the couple. They had met a couple of years ago. After Chrissy had recently gotten out of a relationship, she found out she was pregnant with her first daughter, and Mo stepped up. He cared for her during her pregnancy, even though it wasn't his child. He was great with Tiana and treated her like she was his own daughter. They had opposite schedules. He worked at night at the jail, so he would watch Tiana during the day when Chrissy was at work. Soon after Tiana was born, Chrissy got pregnant with Mo's baby, and they had just gotten married in June of this year. They were expecting their first child in the next couple of months. Sergeant Swenson really did not want to point fingers at someone just because he was one of the few people who matched the description of the man who attacked a woman in Fargo a couple of years before. Mo wasn't perfect. They knew he came from a large family, and his parents were very young when they had him. His mom was about 15, and his dad was 20 at the time. He grew up in a rough area. He had been involved in gangs, even becoming a Crips gang member growing up in California. But he changed his life around when he went into the Navy. Then he played college basketball and had been married and divorced before moving out to North Dakota to be closer to his mom. Now he helped keep bad guys behind bars. Mo was one of the local law enforcement officials who had just been honored at a September 11th breakfast in Valley City. This was just a few days before Mindy's murder. He was in pictures right next to the men who were working on this very case. Just the Sunday before, he had played in a softball tournament on Sergeant Swenson's co-ed team. He was also the coach of the 3rd and 4th grade boys basketball team for Valley City Parks and Rec, a position he had held since January until March of that year. Well, even though he was one of their own, they had to go back and make sure everything checked out. They had to make sure anyone matching the description of the man with the DNA match in Fargo had their DNA submitted to the crime lab. Finally, they got a call back with more shocking information. They got a match. Swenson was like, whoa. He was shocked when he heard the name. Are they sure? The analyst replied, I retested the DNA and I confirmed it's definitely a match. Mo, someone who had literally worked with them in law enforcement. This was someone close to them that they knew personally, someone they trusted. He was a correctional officer at the Barnes County Jail. How could he have done this? It didn't make sense to them, but they had to look into him. It's their job. Even if they had doubts that he had done this, he had willingly come in just a few days ago, like all the other residents, to provide a sample of his DNA. And now his DNA was matched to a case in Fargo with the 22-year-old college student, and now this. So they came up with a plan because they didn't want to tip him off. They said, hey Mo, we're just following up. We have a few more questions. We're just asking a couple of residents to swing by for a few minutes. Mo truly did not suspect anything. He had his 1-year-old stepdaughter in tow, but the whole time, undercover cops were keeping him under surveillance. They were taking pictures and video. That's how we have this picture of him walking in with Tiana. They escorted him into an interview room, and he was with Tiana. The 15-month-old was just clinging to him. It was so cute. It was definitely an emotional moment for the officers. They did have to take Tiana and put her in another room, and then they began the interview. They were hoping it wasn't Mo, and I know what you're thinking. They have the DNA. It has to be him. When they scraped and clipped Mindy's fingernails, they were able to get only 41.2 nanograms of DNA, and not all of that belonged to Mo. I don't want to get into all of this right now, but DNA is considered to be more reliable than any other kind of crime scene evidence. This is exactly why DNA samples of suspects are collected by law enforcement officers, even from people who are the least bit connected. DNA is so much more reliable than any other evidence. Also, it can be collected and then stored, so it can be compared to future or past crimes. Officers wanted to lock down Mo's whereabouts between 12:30 and 1 p.m., that small window. Where was he? First, they asked him the obvious. Do you know Mindy? He said, yeah, I'm familiar with her. You know, I know she's a resident. I saw her come and go. Then he said that on the day of the murder, he left the apartment around 11:30 a.m. He went to lunch with Tiana and Chrissy. He thinks they finished around 12:35. He drops Chrissy off nearby at work and goes back to his apartment with Tiana. It's apartment 1 on the basement floor. He thinks he probably got home around 12:45. That's the exact time frame that they think Mindy was killed. He said he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. He was busy packing up moving boxes. But he did mention the smell of disinfectant. He said that at the time, he thought it was probably the manager of the building cleaning an apartment upstairs. He was only there for maybe 10 minutes because he was packing up a truck full of their moving boxes and taking them to his in-laws. He said he made one of those trips and thinks he was there for about an hour. Then they asked him, "When do you think you last saw Mindy?" He answered, "It was probably like a week before her murder." They asked him, "Have you ever been inside her apartment?" He said, "Well, one day I saw her coming home and she was holding her pants, a laundry basket, and a book bag. So I asked her if she needed a hand, and she said sure. So I helped her take it up to her apartment, but that was it. That's the only time I'd ever been to her apartment." Wow, the detectives were stunned. He just described the crime scene, a scene that they had never released any information about. No one else knew what was behind the door to apartment 9. But somehow, Mo, someone who said he didn't really know Mindy and had no connections to her, now claims he had been inside her apartment before. He just recreated the exact scenario that they believe happened on the day she was murdered. It seems like Mo is looking for a reason for his DNA to be inside her place, an excuse for any connections that they may find. So they ask him if he would take a polygraph, just to rule him out since now he's admitted to going inside her place. They just want to clear him, at least that's what they said. Even though polygraphs cannot be admitted in courts, they can sometimes scare someone into telling the truth. So they press him further during the polygraph asking, "Did you injure Mindy and cause her death?" To which he replied, "No." And of course they asked him a number of other questions. Following the tactic, the examiner let him know that there were signs that he had been deceptive. Now they waited to see if he would break. The examiner said, "You know, it seems to indicate there's something bothering you about this situation, so let's try to resolve it." To which Mo responded that he didn't know anything about it because he wasn't there. Now, the detective uses his biggest piece of evidence to see what Mo's going to say. He said, "What do you know about DNA?" And Mo replies, "Nothing." The detective continues, "What if I told you that your DNA was found on Mindy's body?" Mo kinda scoffs and says, "Well, I would tell you that's not true because I wasn't there." Now there are agents watching Mo's interview from another room, and they notice that he's not really getting scared. He doesn't seem worried, he actually seems pretty calm. So the detective straight up tells him, "We found your DNA under Mindy's fingernails." At this point Mo looks frustrated. He says, "Well, I don't know how my DNA is on her fingernails." That's when the examiner says, "Well, you can't argue with science." At this point, the examiner tells Mo that he's going to let him in on something else. He says, "Your DNA matches an unsolved case from 2 years ago out in Fargo, where a woman was forced to have intercourse against her will." At this point, Mo is shaking his head. He says, "No." He denies it, explaining, "I live there. I had plenty of sexual encounters, but I did not force anyone." He tries to explain what happened. "Yeah, a few times I picked somebody up at a bar, went somewhere, but I know for a fact I never forced anyone." He even personally saw a news article where he mentioned that he had a thing for blondes and recalled the more than 15 women he took back to a hotel or somewhere back then. Essentially, he's accusing the Fargo college student of lying, even though it was proven by a nurse who handles those types of cases that this was indeed forced. She had been drugged and injured, and a witness saw her in that hallway before banging on the door and begging them to call the police. Semen was tested, and it was his. She described the man who did this to her, and he matched Mo's description. The detective is not backing down, even with all of Mo's excuses. He tells him, "The only thing that's going to help you right now is to cut your losses." Mo responds, "Well, I had nothing to do with this. I know that." But they had his DNA at the crime scene. So they arrested Mo Gibbs on the spot for the murder of Mindy Morgenstern. This arrest shocked a lot of people. First, it shocked his family. Chrissy, his wife, could not believe it. No one wanted to believe it. People were coming forward in his defense, and not just locally. There were people coming from all over the place, different states that he had lived in, basketball coaches, ex-girlfriends, colleagues from other jobs he'd had over the years, his own family. They said there is no way that Mo killed anyone, ever. There had to be another reason for his DNA to be there. Logically speaking, most people are going to make the decision to distance themselves. But Chrissy had a lot to think about. Her dad liked Mo. He said that he was there that day at their apartment. He stopped by at 3:30 and Mo was completely normal. He didn't see anything wrong, no cuts or blood, and Mo wasn't acting strange. It just didn't make sense to anyone who knew him. Even Sergeant Swenson tried to get Mo to confess. He's like, "You've got kids, Mo, just like I do. What are you going to tell them when they get older?" But Mo just looked at him and said, "Dave, I didn't do this." When Mindy's family heard the news that someone was arrested, they were shocked. They couldn't believe that this random person, someone that Mindy would have felt safe around, because remember, she mentioned moving there and feeling comfortable because there were law enforcement present. The arrest brought even more questions than answers. One thing was, Mo didn't appear to have any scratches on his hands. On September 18th, he came in and gave that DNA swab. However, when they looked at his hands again when he was arrested, they did notice 2 scratches. One was on his right wrist, which looked shallow and almost healed over. The other was on the back of his left hand, and that one was kind of deep. It wasn't completely healed yet. So they asked him what happened. He said he cut himself while moving boxes on September 14th and again when putting his stepdaughter into her car seat on the 15th. Both days were after the murder. I looked at the cuts, and I'm not an expert, so I went and found some samples online of what defensive scratches look like. You know what? They do look similar. Here they are side by side so you can get an example. And Mo was very strong. I don't think Mindy would have had much of a chance to do that much damage to him. I don't want you to think this is over. I told you there were things that I have to mention, and they're coming up. I did so much research into this because I go into these cases in time sequence. I read articles in the order they're happening, and I also started questioning the science, not about the assault in Fargo. I knew Mo did that, but considering Mindy did not appear to the detectives to have been attacked in the same way, she was fully clothed and stabbed, I just wanted to look a little more into it to do my due diligence, just like the DA and the defense were doing at the same time. Many different pictures of who Mo Gibbs was, or who he was before he got to Valley City. When they started looking into his background, they were able to find out he actually changed his name. It used to be Glendale Morgan Jr., his birth name. He changed it to Mo Morris Gibbs, and this change took place on August 15th, 2005. But why though? Court records indicated his reason was that his father had abandoned him as a child, and he was never part of his life. So he no longer wanted to be known by his last name. This new name had an origin story too, one that set a pattern in motion in my research. Girls, his weakness, women, sex. Blondes, as he put it, seemed to be his Achilles heel. Where it stemmed from, I can't be sure. But as he said, his father abandoned him as a child. His father was a child himself at only 20 when he was born, and his mom, Diane Gravely, was only 15. Maybe it was mommy issues, but Mo seemed to cling on to women. The thing that he appeared to like the most was the honeymoon phase, as people like to call it, the beginning of a relationship. The excitement, the newness, being the Prince Charming and coming to women's rescue, sweeping them off their feet. Many of them had very positive things to say about Mo, but as soon as he would show up in their lives, he would leave, sometimes without warning, many times leaving pregnant girlfriends, fiancés, and even wives behind, never hearing from him again for the most part. This intrigued me. Ladies' man is an understatement. So Mo was born Glenn Morgan, as I said, his legal name. He was born on August 10th, 1972, in Atwater, California. He was raised by his maternal grandmother, and then he got into gang life. As a teenager, he was getting into a lot of trouble, and he was given the choice to either go to jail, go to boot camp, or go into the military. He decided to straighten his life out and go into the Navy in 1990 when he was 18 years old. In 1991, he got married. The woman's name was Tasha McGraw. She was also serving in the Navy with him. However, while he was married and living on the naval base in Washington, he would frequently go out to nightclubs in Seattle, and that's where he met Cheryl Goh. She was visiting one night from British Columbia across the border, and she had no idea that Mo was married. He acted like a perfect gentleman, and they hit it off, starting to date. Now here's where the pattern emerges. Mo told Cheryl he wanted a family. He wanted a wife and children. He was acting as though he was completely single and didn't have those things yet. After a few months of dating Cheryl, she called his house, and a woman answered. This woman told Cheryl that she was his wife, so Cheryl was pretty bummed out at this point. Not knowing that she had just been duped, she decided not to be in an intimate relationship with Mo anymore. Then, he seemed to vanish. Well, there was a reason for that. On May 9, 1992, Mo was arrested in connection to an attempted premeditated murder, a drive-by shooting that happened outside of a nightclub in Seattle. He apparently got into a fight with some guys inside and allegedly shot out of the window, hitting an innocent woman named Vanette Young right in the pelvis. Initially, he stated that he wasn't the one holding the gun. But the trial happened in April of 1993, and his wife, Tasha, was pregnant at the time. She gave birth in October of that year, and there are varying accounts. Some say he took a plea deal and pleaded guilty to attempted murder, while others say the military court proved that it was him. Either way, he was sentenced to 10 years at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, starting in January of 1994. His sister, Brizetta, her name is Breeze for short, in one of her blog posts, she wrote about Mo and his military prison record. She said that he was a model prisoner. He stayed out of trouble and promised he would never go back to prison again. He only served 5.5 years of his 10-year sentence, and he was transferred from Kansas in April 1998 to facilities in Oklahoma City, Springfield, and Phoenix, and then finally released in June of 1999. While he was serving time, he divorced Tasha on September 4, 1997. All the while he was writing letters to Cheryl, remember her, the girl from the club? He explained that the gun accidentally went off. That's what he said happened. So she trusted him. He said he wanted to turn his life around, that he wanted a family, all those same things. After getting out of prison, he was sent to a halfway house in San Diego, California, for 4 months. But once that was over, he drove to British Columbia to start a new life with Cheryl. She worked at a bank at the time, so he was basically Mr. Mom. Cheryl already had a son from a previous relationship, and Mo treated him like his own child. While Cheryl was at work, he cooked, cleaned, picked her up from work, dropped her off, and ran all their errands. She said he wasn't afraid to work hard. Now, he wasn't from Canada, so apparently he couldn't legally get a job, but he did odd jobs like moving furniture for people. They finally took a road trip to Fargo, North Dakota, in November of 1999, a few months after he got out of prison. That's where his mom was living. He had not seen her in years, but Cheryl was really surprised by the way his mom treated him when they arrived. It was as though she was underwhelmed and didn't care. This is just a highlight of the way he was treated. Mo lived with Cheryl over the next 8 to 9 months, and Cheryl got pregnant with his child. But when she was pregnant, she found out he was literally cheating on her with her best friend who lived 5 doors down the hall. He begged Cheryl to please keep him. He wanted a family with her, not the other girl. He said he was so sorry and that it would never happen again. Well, she didn't buy it, and she called him some really evil names. But he never became violent. He never even raised his voice. Soon, he wasn't able to live in Canada at all, no matter where he was living, because when he tried coming over the border, they found out he had a criminal record, so they wouldn't let him across. At that point, he got a place in Bellingham, Washington, and Cheryl would meet him at a mall every so often so that he could hang out with his newborn baby girl. While living in Bellingham, he enrolled in Whatcom College and started playing college basketball in the fall of 2001 until the spring of 2002, and he was also studying medical assisting. Then he got into professional boxing. This man really was a jack of all trades and a master at maybe one, lying to women. He came into the Bellingham Athletic Club and wanted to join the White Cobra boxing team. The coach at the time, James Ferguson, had trained thousands of boxers and made them into champions. He was really impressed with Mo at first because of the way he was built. He was very muscular and athletic. He was a powerhouse. He could tell Mo had experience fighting. Mo admitted, "Yep, I've been in prison, and I've been in gangs." However, Ferguson noticed that Mo had a gentle side to him. He could be a killer. In the ring, though, he hit a guy so hard once that the man's ankles broke. But the issue was that Mo lacked work ethic. He wasn't committed. Sure, he could knock someone out, but he wouldn't train like an athlete. So, the coach passed on the opportunity to have Mo on his team, especially because he would cry and whine if he lost a match. After Ferguson rejected Mo, he never saw him again. It was as if he vanished. While working out at the gym, he met a woman named Faye. She was an art student and said Mo was very nice, quiet, soft-spoken, and he acted like he was single. She had no idea he had 2 children and was actually engaged to a woman in Bellingham named Melissa. Yep, he strikes again. They got married in February of 2002, and he started dating Faye when Melissa was pregnant with his child. Does this sound familiar? That's because it's a pattern. He meets a girl, usually a single mom. By the way, he has a thing for single moms. If they already have a kid, that's better for him because he can act like Mr. Mom. Oh, he's so helpful. He takes my other kid in like his own. Don't be fooled. He meets a girl, acts like a gentleman, and says he wants to settle down, get married, and have a family right away. Then he gets the woman pregnant, cheats, and the cycle starts again. He also targets college students or women who are college graduates with good jobs. This is the pattern. By May of 2002, Melissa was having his 3rd child. Meanwhile, he was going out on dates with Faye, except he wasn't very social, or maybe he was just trying not to be caught by his wife because they would spend time at the gym. They would practice boxing or play basketball at a local park. Faye said he was very secretive. She knew he didn't like his mom and that he hated his dad. But other than that, Mo really didn't talk about his background. He did tell Faye he wanted to get married and have kids right away. Well, Faye had enough after about 4 months because he would leave for whole weekends at a time. Of course, he had another family. He wouldn't tell her where he lived. When he returned, he would have these really outlandish tales about how his car got stolen. That's why he was gone. He was always supposedly in the process of moving somewhere else, which I thought was very interesting and telling. He moved around a lot, and I think I know why. Interestingly, he was moving the week Mindy was killed. When Faye broke up with Mo, he tried to change her mind, but he was never violent. He never raised his voice. He just disappeared from the boxing club and her life. A couple of months later, something weird happened, right before Mo's 30th birthday. In August of 2002, Faye saw his old beat-up car just sitting in a grocery store parking lot. At first, the car was parked there, but over time, she realized he left it there on purpose. But guess what? Faye found out she was pregnant with his child. She had no idea where this man went. She gave birth on March 20, 2003, a mere 10 days after another one of his girlfriends from the same area gave birth as well. On March 10th, these 2 women were pregnant at the same time, and they didn't know it. I would be mortified. They could have had the same doctor, and he's still married to Melissa. From fall 2002 to spring 2003, he was still playing basketball, going to college, and working at Fast Cap Shipping Center. His basketball coach at the time said that Mo was definitely an older player on the team. He never had a car and always had to get a ride, but he maintained the 2.0 average he needed to play. The coach didn't know much about Mo, but did know that he carried around a military ID and was really popular on campus. However, as soon as the season ended, bam, he disappeared. The coach had never had a player do that before, just leave without telling anyone where they were going. Faye eventually went into that grocery store and told the staff, "Listen, that car out there? It ain't going anywhere." He abandoned it. But she also did something else. She befriended a girl from the college that Mo was attending, someone who used to hang out with him, someone who knew where he was living back then. She took Faye to where she had hung out with Mo. It was a 1-room, dirty little hole-in-the-wall apartment on the border of Canada, 16 miles away. Faye found the landlord and asked what happened. They told her that Mo just vanished, leaving everything behind, clothing, shoes, everything. It was as if he was still living there, but he was gone. We know Mo was in Texas in August of 2003 because he was boxing there on a professional level. He actually obtained a professional boxing license. According to the Texas Boxing Association, he was a licensed professional cruiserweight boxer, weighing in at 197 pounds from August 2003 to August 2004, while again studying medical assisting at Hallmark Institute of Technology. On August 25, Mo had his debut fight at the Civic Center in Humboldt, Texas. He listed his hometown as San Antonio, and his promoter at the time was Reginald McGowan, who knew Mo as a really nice guy. He often saw Mo with his pretty brunette, whom he referred to as his wife, but we know his real wife Melissa was back in Washington at the time. Mo went on to fight in 5 different states: Arizona, South Dakota, Rhode Island, and Minnesota, and he lost every one of those fights. It seemed like he was just trying to get a paycheck, which was all he really cared about. Mo never met the son he had with Faye. However, he found out she was pregnant and had given birth. Every year on Mother's Day, he would call or text her to say, "Happy Mother's Day," and that was it. In June 2004, he moved to North Dakota, where he enrolled at Mayville State University in the spring, studying physical education, the same major as Mindy, but at a different college. Faye said he moved there because Mo's mom wanted all her kids nearby. Scott Berry, the Mayville State basketball coach, described Mo as well-mannered, mature, and disciplined. He also mentioned that Mo would talk about being a professional boxer, but they didn't believe him until one day they turned on ESPN, and there he was. So he did tell the truth about some things. This brings us to the incident when a 22-year-old student claimed that Mo drugged her at a nightclub and took advantage of her against her will. He was in North Dakota at the time, dating a woman from North Dakota State University, which is in Fargo, the same city where the attack took place. Mo divorced his wife Melissa in January 2005 because he was dating his new love, whom he had already proposed to. He met this woman while playing basketball and fell in love with her. Her last name was Gibbs. Mo was still going by his legal name Glenn Morgan, but he had been called Mo for a long time. When he requested a name change on August 15, 2005, he took his then-fiancée's last name and the Mo from his given last name, creating Mo Gibbs. It's interesting that he wanted to change his name after that attack happened. Well, the relationship with his love of his life ended, but he still took her last name. By January 2005, he was living in Fargo and working as a housekeeper at the Wingate Inn. This job was significant because it gave him access to rooms. If you have the key to a room, you can go in and out anytime you want. During this time, he met Chrissy Judd, a student at Valley City State University. Her dad, George, was the athletic director at the time. Chrissy was just getting out of a relationship and realized she was pregnant, but she was about to graduate from college. Mo was there for her, even though it wasn't his baby. However, he could only visit on weekends because he had a job in Fargo. Chrissy had been working at the Wagon Wheel Inn in Valley City for a long time, and she knew her manager, Christy, very well. She told Christy, "Hey, Mo needs a job. I want him to be able to move closer." With Chrissy's help, Mo landed a job at another hotel. After that, he was able to move in with Chrissy and out of Fargo. How convenient. By January 2006, he was coaching the 3rd and 4th grade boys basketball team for Valley City Parks and Recreation. His manager's son was on the team he coached, and she thought he was an awesome coach. The boys absolutely adored him and were devastated by his arrest. Here's where things get very interesting. At this point, Mo wanted to start working at the university, possibly because his fiance's dad worked there. He thought he could do what he had always done in the past and get a little help landing the job, a shoe-in. He applied for the position of night security guard on campus, which required a background check. The school assumed that a background check would involve a nationwide criminal background check, right? That's what you would think, especially for a job that puts someone in a position of authority. But it turns out the sheriff's office, for whatever reason, only conducted a local background check on Mo. They only searched city records. That was pretty dumb. If they had looked closely, they would have seen he had just moved there. The point of a background check is to check someone's history, including where they've been before, and that wasn't done. The school usually doesn't do many background checks. They only request a small number for potential employees who would have broad access to buildings on campus. Mo got hired at the school, and this easily could have been where he first saw Mindy, or maybe it was when she moved into his apartment building. Their paths could have crossed, and it wouldn't have been that hard. This is a small town. Mindy had a big personality, and Mo would go to a number of events. His current fiancée was an alumna, and her dad was the athletic director. Mo was even involved in basketball, a sport that Mindy loved, and he resembled her idol, Michael Jordan, with his muscular athletic physique. They were bound to have at least had a good conversation at one point. It's definitely possible, but we've seen Mindy's exes and her current boyfriend, and they definitely don't have a similar look to Mo. And it goes both ways. I know you haven't seen all of Mo's exes, but they look similar to Chrissy, who looks very different from Mindy. So, what happened? Well, there's more. Mo is working as a security guard at the university from February 24 to April 15. He's always had a thing for college students, so maybe it was his way to get close to them. But now, for whatever reason, he decides to apply for a job at the county jail. They have refused to comment about their hiring procedures, but there's no statewide policy set in place for county jails. However, there's a signed authorization form from Mo that allowed them to conduct a background check in Washington, California, Texas, and North Dakota. When someone's finally hired at the jail, they get fingerprinted, and then those fingerprints are sent to the FBI. However, a criminal background was never done, not even when he requested a name change. Because in North Dakota, they don't require a background check. A lot of states do. And if it would have been done, they probably wouldn't have granted the change. It's what truly threw off his background checks. They failed to look into his former name. However, it does show up when you run a check of his new name. It shows that it's been changed. However, the chief of police said he never would have thought a name change could hide a criminal record. Sounds like someone dropped the ball. This is merely months before Mindy's murder. Still, everyone who knew him during this time says he was a wonderful dad to his stepdaughter, Tiana, a good fiancé to Chrissy, and an awesome coach. All positives. Did he have them all fooled? He married Chrissy in the summer of 2006 on June 30. She's an artist, a photographer, and at the time, things were going well for them. Unbeknownst to Chrissy, though, Mo had been cheating on her. He had gotten another woman pregnant at the same time again, a 20-nice-year-old woman named Amy Olsen. They must have been pretty serious behind Chrissy's back because 9 days after Mo is arrested on September 20, he proposes to Amy. But he's still married. The man doesn't care. He throws women away like trash, and children for that matter. Out with the old, in with the new, the honeymoon stage. He likes the thrill of the chase, and once he's got them hooked, he throws them back in and looks for another fish in the sea. It's cruel. Oh, and Amy already had his baby months before this, in July, a newborn baby girl named Niva. The annulment doesn't even go into effect until April 30, 2007, a year later. And it must have been a legal strategy, I think. I'm not sure, or maybe it was to collect funds from him. But I definitely know that in order for her to testify, especially because she was testifying against him, she had to annul the marriage. We'll get into that later. But the poor woman was still paying off their wedding rings and their photo album. It's so sad. She had close to $2,000 in expenses. What a waste. A complete waste in so many ways. But I do know this. Amy Olsen couldn't wait to be Amy Gibbs. She was standing by her man no matter what. After the arrest, a woman inmate from the Barnes County Jail speaks up. She says on the morning of September 13, the day that Mindy was killed, she was awoken at 6 a.m. Correctional Officer Mo Gibbs violating her with his hand while she was sleeping. And conveniently, the cameras weren't pointing in that direction, or they weren't recording that day. But this is very telling. The prosecutor now believes there is a clear motive here for Mindy's murder. Mo's sexual frustration, because he wasn't able to finish what he started. That morning, she began to cause a little bit of a scene, so he stopped. She wasn't the only one. 5 more women were brave enough to come forward against the one-time authority figure, and they told their stories of what he had done to them, usually while they slept on his overnight shifts. On October 26, 2006, Mo pleads not guilty to the murder charges against him. And that same day, he was charged separately with 6 counts of gross sexual misconduct at different levels because the acts were all different, all very serious offenses. By November, he pleaded not guilty to the Fargo case involving the 22-year-old victim that his DNA was linked to. In the spring of that next year, 2007, changes were legally made to the criminal background check requirements of correctional officers and other professionals in North Dakota. Because of Mo's case, he had a court date in March. And guess who's there? Amy Olsen, with their infant daughter making an appearance. She said she already considered the couple married in her mind, but they had to wait until after the trial to make it official, because where Mo is being held, they don't allow inmates to marry while they're waiting for trial. This woman said that the delay was frustrating, but that it feels more like a technicality because our hearts are married. She said, "It doesn't take paperwork to confirm someone's feelings for you." Meanwhile, jury selection is happening in this case. This man is being charged with felony murder, for which he faces up to life in prison without parole. And she's talking about how she's already introducing herself as Amy Gibbs and legally changing her name. She even had Gibbs tattooed on the back of her neck and a ring with Mo's initials tattooed on her finger. She said, "You don't just do that for somebody on a whim, ma'am. That's the last name of a university student that this man fell in love with when he was married to another woman. That isn't even his real legal last name." Mindy's mom desperately wanted Mo Gibbs to apologize for taking Mindy's life, so she wrote him a letter, and she never expected to get anything back. But Mo responded. He denied murdering Mindy. He refused to take responsibility for his actions. Mo told Eunice in his letter that he worked his entire life to prove that he was a good person and wouldn't have killed Mindy. Mindy's mom was hoping that Mo would finally take responsibility for his actions and show some remorse. But instead, he chose to deny any wrongdoing. The denials only added to their pain and their anger. He was unwilling to accept the consequences of his actions. Mo's attorneys got a venue change because of how much publicity this case got in the small town of Valley City. So they moved it to Minot, North Dakota, which is over 3 hours away. His exes were shocked by his arrest. Cheryl said, "Yeah, he was manipulative, but he was never violent." And Faye said, she was really hoping that this case against Mo was a mistake because he's a really good person. He just had a very bad childhood. And it turned out this wasn't the first time that people came to Mo's defense. Remember 1993? Well, the U.S. Navy prosecutor argued in his sentencing recommendation that Mo was dangerous. He was a man who needed to be put away from society for a long time. But all of Mo's friends and family disagreed. They said he was set up and that he just wouldn't rat out a friend. There were 24 letters written asking the court to grant Mo clemency. His mom wrote that she understood that her son might not always make the right decisions. She did not condone what he might have done, but giving him 10 years would not be justice. The letters were all about how good he was, respectful and loving. Even his wife at the time, Tasha, wrote a letter saying he was a devoted husband. If she only knew. A military judicial official denied the request for clemency, and Mo served his time. So now what? Was this case all a big mistake? Mo's defense attorneys think so. He argued that the authorities rushed to judgment in Mindy's case because Mo's DNA was found in the Fargo case. He said that the amount of DNA collected at Mindy's scene was very insignificant, and there are doubts that exist about how it got there and how long it had been there. Was it though? Because the prosecution said it was a significant amount, 41.2 nanograms, 75 of which 30.8 nanograms belonged to Mo, meaning the major profile is Mo's and the other belonged to Mindy herself. Plus, there was evidence that DNA belonging to Mo was found on Mindy's bloody shirt as well. Interestingly, here's what he was able to dig up. As far as other evidence, or the lack thereof, there were no usable fingerprints found on the knives. But DNA from 2 different males was found on those knives and inside a pair of gloves at the apartment, and they didn't match Mo. Hair samples were collected even from Mindy's left hand, the same one where they found the tissue underneath her nails. And the hairs were never able to be linked to anyone, Not Mo's hairs either. No evidence was found in Mo's car or his apartment linking him to Mindy. A delivery man came forward and said he saw two men running from the apartment building on the day of Mindy's murder. Authorities said they looked, but they could never find them. Mo had his 1-year-old stepdaughter with him that day when Chrissy was at work. So the defense attorney questioned the logistics of this. He would have to have taken the child to the crime scene. That's what he said. Crime scene analysts said there were no signs that a baby was at the crime scene. So is that reasonable doubt? The defense also stated that the crime scene looked similar to ones that a woman perpetrator would stage, and it didn't look like the aftermath of someone the size of Mo. What he meant was, there would actually have been more damage if someone his size had done this. He went on to say that Mo's DNA was found because of transfer DNA from the communal areas of the apartment building, like the door handle from the door they all shared. But there was also DNA found on Mindy's bloody shirt, and Mo's DNA could not be excluded. Here's what could have been confusing and caused doubts. The crime scene analyst Hope Olson, same name as Mo's new fiancée, but no relation, agreed that the small amount of Mo's DNA could be touch DNA, but it was extremely unlikely. She said it could not be secondary transfer, meaning it couldn't come from a door. Instead, it had to come from somebody in contact with Mindy. The trial began on June 19, 2007. The prosecution brought forth all the evidence. They added that Mo was an avid texter. He was texting and emailing all day, constantly on his phone, even when he was at work. When they pulled up his records, there was never a period of time where he went over an hour or hours without texting, calling, emailing, or doing something on his phone. They pulled up text messages, social media, Yahoo, and MSN Messenger. He was unaccounted for at least an hour and 5 minutes that day. On the day of Mindy's murder, after dropping Chrissy off at work, she texted him at 12:33. It says, "Can you bring me a drink? Powerade, water, or apple juice, or Snapple, strawberry kiwi." At 12:45, he says he dropped off a drink, and by 12:47, he left her work. But that's when they also believe Mindy was killed. Her first unanswered call was at 12:47, and after that, last text from Chrissy, every other text went unanswered on Mo's phone until approximately 1:30. At that moment, a rush of them were answered, and activity went back to normal again. Also, recall the smell of pine sol beginning around 1 o'clock. According to witnesses, the prosecution's theory is that Mo saw his opportunity. He pushed Mindy inside her apartment and attempted to force himself on her, but she was athletic, stronger than he thought, and she fought hard. When she fought back, things went from bad to worse, and he realized he had to take drastic steps. He tried to strangle her with a belt, but just to make sure she was dead, he grabbed a knife from her kitchen. The first knife actually broke, so he grabbed a second and tried to use it to cut her throat. That's a very hard thing to accomplish. He gave up pretty quickly and instead just stabbed her. Then he took pine sol and poured it all over her body, hoping to get rid of some evidence. And then he fled back to his apartment. His texting and emailing started right back up again. Mindy's never did. Considering he lived inside the apartment building, no one would have seen anyone running in or out. The prosecutor held up Mindy's bloody shirt, and it was way worse than I thought. It all made sense to me. This man was guilty. But the jury didn't get to hear everything. They didn't get to hear about the motive. Nope, they didn't get to hear about his past. Not at all. They were limited to what was at the crime scene and what witnesses said. And you know how many people had good things to say about Mo, his past, the shooting, the conduct at the jail, even what he did in Fargo. None of that got in. The prosecution tried to get it in, at least, maybe just what occurred on the morning of Mindy's murder at the jail, but that was denied too. Too prejudicial, the court said. The defense had argued to the judge that there were no signs of anything sexual at Mindy's crime scene. Ultimately, the jury wasn't convinced. The evidence pointed both ways, that he could or could not have done it. There was reasonable doubt, and they were deadlocked. After 4 days, a hung jury. Mindy's family and friends were shocked, and Chrissy was terrified. She did not know if this man was going to walk the streets again. But that's not how it works. They were going to set up a brand new trial, but everything had to be redone. Former jurors actually came forward and gave prosecutors advice on what they could have done better. I didn't even know that was allowed. But one of them said they didn't put enough emphasis on the DNA under the fingernails. They needed to prove it wasn't transfer. And two, there was a problem. At the first trial, they showed a 90-minute redacted version of Mo's interrogation before his arrest, and he had baby Tiana in his arms. It pulled at the jurors' heartstrings, and I get it. We're human. The jurors said they saw how much that little girl needed him and loved him. They didn't know one bad thing about Mo because, remember, they couldn't know anything about his past. So they saw him as a good person, as a good dad. The DA knew they needed an expert who could refute the transfer DNA theory, and they needed to exclude that video of Tiana and Mo. Once again, they tried to get the judge to let in one sexual incident at the jail on the 13th, but it was again denied. Mo's second trial began in October 2007, a few months following the first one, and it was moved to Grand Forks, North Dakota, 2 hours away. This time, the prosecutor had more witnesses and more experts, especially to explain the amount of DNA being significant and not able to be transferred from a door or from him helping her take her laundry basket up to her apartment. The new experts said this amount of DNA could only have gotten there from vigorous physical contact, like scratching the arm in defense of someone trying to grab you. Mo actually wanted to hire Michael Botten, a forensic expert, but he couldn't afford him. He's a famous doctor whose wife has her own show, Linda. Kenny Botten was the defense attorney, and Botten usually does testify as a witness for defense cases. So they thought they got the next best thing, a former actor who used to play a forensic scientist, but then went on to own his own lab. I guess that's all they could afford. But again, the jury was deliberating for days. Finally, they came back. This time, it was guilty. Finally. I mean, to me, it was clear from everything I saw, but I could see how there could be reasonable doubt. It's hard sometimes. I think it's not fair that they can't know how bad these people are, like what they've done before. Eunice actually forgave Mo, saying, "Mr. Gibbs, I forgive you publicly here. I also want you to know I won't forget what you did to Mindy." But this man remained arrogant. He denied it, literally addressing the courtroom, saying, "I didn't commit this crime. If and when the person who actually did this crime comes to justice, I would forgive him, just as she would have forgiven me." He was sentenced to life without parole. Had Mo stayed in prison and served his full sentence for the attempted murder when he was in the Navy, the full sentence would not have ended until April 6, 2003, possibly not giving him enough time to cross paths with Mindy at all. He did end up pleading guilty to the sexual misconduct at the county jail and to the one in Fargo. The victim gave an impact statement at his sentencing hearing, and she said she was not very nice to him. She said he has daughters of his own. She wanted to say a lot of things, and she did. She said, "Imagine your daughters screaming, 'How I did on the night in 2004. Her message that she wanted to give was that there is life and happiness after all of this. She's married now with children of her own, and she says that she's going to tell them her story and Mindy's when they're old enough. She wants to warn them." In the end, Mindy fighting back that day helped solve her own murder and the other crimes Mo committed against all of those other women. Her family said that's the way she would have wanted it. She always cared about helping others and would have made sacrifices so that others could live. That's exactly why she was living in that apartment building to begin with, to take the pain of those chemo infusions in hopes that her sacrifice would help others survive multiple sclerosis.